Book 9, Chapter 1 of The Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, The Preliminary Investigation. Chapter 1, The Beginning of Perhotin's Official Career. Pyotr Ilyitch Perhotin, whom he left knocking at the strong locked gates of the widow Morozov's house, ended, of course, by making himself heard. Fenya, who was still excited by the fright she had had 2 hours before, and too much upset to go to bed, was almost frightened into hysterics on hearing the furious knocking at the gate. Though she had herself seen him drive away, she fancied that it must be Dmitri Fyodorovitch knocking again. No one else could knock so savagely. She ran to the house porter, who had already waked up and gone out to the gate, and began imploring him not to open it. But having questioned Pyotr Ilyitch and learned that he wanted to see Fenya on very important business, the man made up his mind at last to open. Pyotr Ilyitch was admitted into Fenya's kitchen, but the girl begged him to allow the house porter to be present, because of her misgivings. He began questioning her, and at once learned the most vital fact, that is, that when Dmitri Fyodorovitch had run out to look for Grushenka, he had snatched up a pestle from the mortar, and that when he returned, the pestle was not with him, and his hands were smeared with blood. "And the blood was simply flowing, dripping from him, dripping!" Fenya kept exclaiming. This horrible detail was simply the product of her disordered imagination. But although not dripping, Pyotr Ilyitch had himself seen those hands stained with blood, and had helped to wash them. Moreover, the question he had to decide was, not how soon the blood had dried, but where Dmitri Fyodorovitch had run with the pestle, or rather, whether it really was to Fyodor Pavlovitch's, and how he could satisfactorily ascertain. Pyotr Ilyitch persisted in returning to this point, and though he found out nothing conclusive, yet he carried away a conviction that Dmitri Fyodorovitch could have gone nowhere but to his father's house, and that, therefore, something must have happened there. "And when he came back," Fenya added with excitement, "I told him the whole story, and then I began asking him, 'Why have you got blood on your hands, Dmitri Fyodorovitch?' And he answered that that was human blood, and that he had just killed someone. He confessed it all to me, and suddenly ran off like a madman. I sat down and began thinking, where has he run off to now, like a madman? He'll go to Mokroe, I thought, and kill my mistress there. I ran out to beg him not to kill her. I was running to his lodgings, but I looked at Plotnikov's shop and saw him just setting off, and there was no blood on his hands then." Fenya had noticed this and remembered it. Fenya's old grandmother confirmed her evidence as far as she was capable. After asking some further questions, Pyotr Ilyitch left the house, even more upset and uneasy than he had been when he entered it. The most direct and the easiest thing for him to do would have been to go straight to Fyodor Pavlovitch's, to find out whether anything had happened there, and if so, what, and only to go to the police captain, as Pyotr Ilyitch firmly intended doing, when he had satisfied himself of the fact. But the night was dark, Fyodor Pavlovitch's gates were strong, and he would have to knock again. His acquaintance with Fyodor Pavlovitch was of the slightest, and what if, after he had been knocking, they opened to him, and nothing had happened? Fyodor Pavlovitch, in his jeering way, would go telling the story all over the town, how a stranger called Perhotin had broken in upon him at midnight to ask if anyone had killed him. It would make a scandal, and scandal was what Pyotr Ilyitch dreaded more than anything in the world. Yet the feeling that possessed him was so strong that, though he stamped his foot angrily and swore at himself, he set off again, not to Fyodor Pavlovitch's, but to Madame Khaklakov's. He decided that if she denied having just given Dmitri Fyodorovitch 3,000 rubles, he would go straight to the police captain, but if she admitted having given him the money, he would go home and let the matter rest till next morning. It is, of course, perfectly evident that there was even more likelihood of causing scandal by going at 11 o'clock at night to a fashionable lady, a complete stranger, and perhaps rousing her from her bed to ask her an amazing question, than by going to Fyodor Pavlovitch. But that is just how it is, sometimes, especially in cases like the present one, with the decisions of the most precise and phlegmatic people. Pyotr Ilyitch was by no means phlegmatic at that moment. He remembered all his life how a haunting uneasiness gradually gained possession of him, growing more and more painful and driving him on against his will. Yet he kept cursing himself, of course, all the way for going to this lady, but "I will get to the bottom of it, I will," he repeated for the 10th time, grinding his teeth, and he carried out his intention. It was exactly 11 o'clock when he entered Madame Chachlikov's house. He was admitted into the yard pretty quickly, but, in response to his inquiry whether the lady was still up, the porter could give no answer, except that she was usually in bed by that time. "Ask at the top of the stairs. If the lady wants to receive you, she'll receive you. If she won't, she won't." Pyotr Ilyitch went up, but did not find things so easy here. The footman was unwilling to take in his name, but finally called a maid. Pyotr Ilyitch politely but insistently begged her to inform her lady that an official living in the town called Perhotin had called on particular business, and that if it were not of the greatest importance he would not have ventured to come. "Tell her in those words exactly," he asked the girl. She went away. He remained waiting in the entry. Madame Chachlikov herself was already in her bedroom, though not yet asleep. She had felt upset ever since Mitya's visit, and had a presentiment that she would not get through the night without the sick headache which always, with her, followed such excitement. She was surprised on hearing the announcement from the maid. She irritably declined to see him, however, though the unexpected visit at such an hour of an official living in the town, who was a total stranger, roused her feminine curiosity intensely. But this time Pyotr Ilyitch was as obstinate as a mule. He begged the maid most earnestly to take another message in these very words: that he had come on business of the greatest importance, and that Madame Chachlikov might have cause to regret it later if she refused to see him now. "I plunged headlong," he described it afterwards. The maid, gazing at him in amazement, went to take his message again. Madame Chachlikov was impressed. She thought a little, asked what he looked like, and learned that he was very well dressed, young, and so polite. We may note, parenthetically, that Pyotr Ilyitch was a rather good-looking young man, and well aware of the fact. Madame Chachlikov made up her mind to see him. She was in her dressing-gown and slippers, but she flung a black shawl over her shoulders. The official was asked to walk into the drawing-room, the very room in which Mitya had been received shortly before. The lady came to meet her visitor with a sternly inquiring countenance, and, without asking him to sit down, began at once with the question: "What do you want?" "I have ventured to disturb you, madam, on a matter concerning our common acquaintance, Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov," Perhotin began. But he had hardly uttered the name when the lady's face showed signs of acute irritation. She almost shrieked, and interrupted him in a fury. "How much longer am I to be worried by that awful man?" she cried hysterically. "How dare you, sir? How could you venture to disturb a lady who is a stranger to you, in her own house, at such an hour? And to force yourself upon her to talk of a man who came here, to this very drawing-room, only 3 hours ago, to murder me, and went stamping out of the room, as no one would go out of a decent house. Let me tell you, sir, that I shall lodge a complaint against you, that I will not let it pass. Kindly leave me at once. I am a mother. I... "Murder? Then he tried to murder you too?" "Why, has he killed somebody else?" Madame Chachlikov asked impulsively. "If you would kindly listen, madam, for half a moment, I'll explain it all in a couple of words," answered Perhotin firmly. "At 5 o'clock this afternoon Dmitri Fyodorovitch borrowed 10 roubles from me, and I know for a fact he had no money. Yet at 9 o'clock he came to see me with a bundle of 100-rouble notes in his hand, about 2,000 or 3,000 roubles. His hands and face were all covered with blood, and he looked like a madman. When I asked him where he had got so much money, he answered that he had just received it from you, and that you had given him a sum of 3,000 to go to the gold mines." Madame Chachlikov's face assumed an expression of intense and painful excitement. "Good God! He must have killed his old father!" she cried, clasping her hands. "I have never given him money, never! Oh, run, run! Don't say another word! Save the old man! Run to his father! Run!" "Excuse me, madam, then you did not give him money? You remember for a fact that you did not give him any money?" "No, I didn't. I didn't. I refused to give it him, for he could not appreciate it. He ran out in a fury, stamping. He rushed at me, but I slipped away. And, let me tell you, as I wish to hide nothing from you now, that he positively spat at me. Can you fancy that? But why are we standing? Ah, sit down. Excuse me, or better, run! Run! You must run and save the poor old man from an awful death." "But if he has killed him already?" "Ah, good heavens, yes! Then what are we to do now? What do you think we must do now?" Meantime she had made Pyotr Ilyitch sit down, and sat down herself, facing him. Briefly, but fairly clearly, Pyotr Ilyitch told her the history of the affair, that part of it at least which he had himself witnessed. He described too his visit to Fenya, and told her about the pestle. All these details produced an overwhelming effect on the distracted lady, who kept uttering shrieks and covering her face with her hands. "Would you believe it? I foresaw all this. I have that special faculty, whatever I imagine comes to pass. And how often I have looked at that awful man, and always thought, that man will end by murdering me. And now it's happened. That is, if he hasn't murdered me, but only his own father, it's only because the finger of God preserved me. And what's more, he was ashamed to murder me, because in this very place I put the holy icon from the relics of the holy martyr, Saint Varvara, on his neck. And to think how near I was to death at that minute I went close up to him, and he stretched out his neck to me. Do you know, Pyotr Ilyitch, I think you said your name was Pyotr Ilyitch? I don't believe in miracles, but that icon and this unmistakable miracle with me now, that shakes me, and I'm ready to believe in anything you like. Have you heard about Father Zosima? But I don't know what I'm saying. And only fancy, with the icon on his neck, he spat at me. He only spat, it's true. He didn't murder me, and he dashed away. But what shall we do? What must we do now? What do you think?" Pyotr Ilyitch got up and announced that he was going straight to the police captain to tell him all about it, and leave him to do what he thought fit. "Oh, he's an excellent man, excellent. Michael Makarovitch, I know him. Of course, he's the person to go to. How practical you are, Pyotr Ilyitch! How well you've thought of everything! I should never have thought of it in your place." "Especially as I know the police captain very well too," observed Pyotr Ilyitch, who still continued to stand, and was obviously anxious to escape as quickly as possible from the impulsive lady, who would not let him say good-bye and go away. "And be sure, she prattled on, to come back and tell me what you see there, and what you find out, what comes to light, how they'll try him, and what he's condemned to. Tell me, we have no capital punishment, have we? But be sure to come, even if it's at 3 o'clock at night, at 4, at 4:30. Tell them to wake me, to shake me, if I don't get up. But good heavens, I shan't sleep. But wait, hadn't I better come with you?" "No, but if you would write 3 lines with your own hand, stating that you did not give Dmitri Fyodorovitch money, it might perhaps be of use, in case it's needed." "To be sure." Madame Kharlikov skipped, delighted, to her bureau. "And you know, I'm simply struck, amazed at your resourcefulness, your good sense in such affairs. Are you in the service here? I'm delighted to think that you're in the service here." And still speaking, she scribbled on half a sheet of notepaper the following lines: "I've never in my life lent to that unhappy man, Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov, for in spite of all he is unhappy, 3,000 roubles today. I've never given him money. Never. That I swear by all that's holy. K. Kharlikov." "Here's the note." She turned quickly to Pyotr Ilyitch. "Go, save him. It's a noble deed on your part." And she made the sign of the cross 3 times over him. She ran out to accompany him to the passage. "How grateful I am to you! You can't think how grateful I am to you for having come to me first. How is it I haven't met you before? I shall be flattered at seeing you at my house in the future. How delightful it is that you are living here! Such precision, such practical ability. They must appreciate you. They must understand you. If there's anything I can do, believe me. Oh, I love young people. I'm in love with young people. The younger generation are the one prop of our suffering country, her one hope. Oh, go, go!" But Pyotr Ilyitch had already run away, or she would not have let him go so soon. Yet Madame Kharlikov had made a rather agreeable impression on him, which had somewhat softened his anxiety at being drawn into such an unpleasant affair. Tastes differ, as we all know. "She's by no means so elderly," he thought, feeling pleased. "On the contrary, I should have taken her for her daughter." As for Madame Kharlikov, she was simply enchanted by the young man. "Such sense, such exactness, in so young a man! In our day, and all that with such manners and appearance! People say the young people of today are no good for anything, but here's an example," etc. So she simply forgot this dreadful affair, and it was only as she was getting into bed that, suddenly recalling how near death she had been, she exclaimed, "Ah, it is awful, awful!" But she fell at once into a sound, sweet sleep. I would not, however, have dwelt on such trivial and irrelevant details if this eccentric meeting of the young official with the by no means elderly widow had not subsequently turned out to be the foundation of the whole career of that practical and precise young man. His story is remembered to this day with amazement in our town, and I shall perhaps have something to say about it when I have finished my long history of the brothers Karamazov. End of Chapter 1 of Book 9.
Book 9, Chapter 2 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 2. The Alarm. Our police captain, Mikhail Makarovich Makarov, a retired lieutenant colonel, was a widower and an excellent man. He had only come to us 3 years previously, but had won general esteem, chiefly because he knew how to keep society together. He was never without visitors, and could not have got on without them. Someone or other was always dining with him. He never sat down to table without guests. He gave regular dinners, too, on all sorts of occasions, sometimes most surprising ones. Though the fare was not recherché, it was abundant. The fish pies were excellent, and the wine made up in quantity for what it lacked in quality. The first room his guests entered was a well-fitted billiard room, with pictures of English racehorses in black frames on the walls, an essential decoration, as we all know, for a bachelor's billiard room. There was card-playing every evening at his house, if only at one table, but at frequent intervals all the society of our town, with the mammas and young ladies, assembled at his house to dance. Mikhail Makarovich was a widower. He did not live alone. His widowed daughter lived with him, with her 2 unmarried daughters, grown-up girls who had finished their education. They were of agreeable appearance and lively character, and though everyone knew they would have no dowry, they attracted all the young men of fashion to their grandfather's house. Mikhail Makarovich was by no means very efficient in his work, though he performed his duties no worse than many others. To speak plainly, he was a man of rather narrow education. His understanding of the limits of his administrative power could not always be relied upon. It was not so much that he failed to grasp certain reforms enacted during the present reign, as that he made conspicuous blunders in his interpretation of them. This was not from any special lack of intelligence, but from carelessness, for he was always in too great a hurry to go into the subject. "I have the heart of a soldier rather than of a civilian," he used to say of himself. He had not even formed a definite idea of the fundamental principles of the reforms connected with the emancipation of the serfs, and only picked it up, so to speak, from year to year, involuntarily increasing his knowledge by practice. And yet he was himself a landowner. Piotr Ilyitch knew for certain that he would meet some of Mikhail Makarovitch's visitors there that evening, but he didn't know which. As it happened, at that moment the prosecutor and Varvinsky, our district doctor, a young man who had only just come to us from Petersburg after taking a brilliant degree at the Academy of Medicine, were playing whist at the police captain's. Hippolyte Kirillovitch, the prosecutor, he was really the deputy prosecutor, but we always called him the prosecutor, was rather a peculiar man of about 35, inclined to be consumptive, and married to a fat and childless woman. He was vain and irritable, though he had a good intellect, and even a kind heart. It seemed that all that was wrong with him was that he had a better opinion of himself than his ability warranted, and that made him seem constantly uneasy. He had, moreover, certain higher, even artistic leanings towards psychology, for instance, a special study of the human heart, a special knowledge of the criminal and his crime. He cherished a grievance on this ground, considering that he had been passed over in the service, and being firmly persuaded that in higher spheres he had not been properly appreciated, and had enemies. In gloomy moments he even threatened to give up his post and practice as a barrister in criminal cases. The unexpected Karamazov case agitated him profoundly. It was a case that might well be talked about all over Russia. But I am anticipating. Nikolai Parfenovitch Nelyudov, the young investigating lawyer, who had only come from Petersburg 2 months before, was sitting in the next room with the young ladies. People talked about it afterwards and wondered that all the gentlemen should, as so intentionally, on the evening of the crime, have been gathered together at the house of the executive authority. Yet it was perfectly simple and happened quite naturally. Hippolyte Kirillovitch's wife had had toothache for the last 2 days, and he was obliged to go out to escape from her groans. The doctor, from the very nature of his being, could not spend an evening except at cards. Nikolai Parfenovitch Nelyudov had been intending for 3 days past to drop in that evening at Mihail Makarovitch's, so to speak casually, so as slyly to startle the eldest granddaughter, Olga Mikhailovna, by showing that he knew her secret, that he knew it was her birthday, and that she was trying to conceal it on purpose, so as not to be obliged to give a dance. He anticipated a great deal of merriment, many playful jests about her age, and her being afraid to reveal it, about his knowing her secret and telling everybody, and so on. The charming young man was a great adept at such teasing. The ladies had christened him the naughty man, and he seemed to be delighted at the name. He was extremely well bred, however, of good family, education, and feelings, and though leading a life of pleasure, his sallies were always innocent and in good taste. He was short and delicate looking. On his white, slender little fingers he always wore a number of big, glittering rings. When he was engaged in his official duties, he always became extraordinarily grave, as though realizing his position and the sanctity of the obligations laid upon him. He had a special gift for mystifying murderers and other criminals of the peasant class during interrogation, and if he did not win their respect, he certainly succeeded in arousing their wonder. Piotr Ilyitch was simply dumbfounded when he went into the police captain's. He saw instantly that everyone knew. They had positively thrown down their cards, all were standing up and talking. Even Nikolai Parfenovitch had left the young ladies and run in, looking strenuous and ready for action. Piotr Ilyitch was met with the astounding news that old Fyodor Pavlovitch really had been murdered that evening in his own house, murdered and robbed. The news had only just reached them in the following manner. Marfa Ignatyevna, the wife of old Grigory, who had been knocked senseless near the fence, was sleeping soundly in her bed, and might well have slept till morning after the draught she had taken. But all of a sudden she waked up, no doubt roused by a fearful epileptic scream from Smerdyakov, who was lying in the next room unconscious. That scream always preceded his fits, and always terrified and upset Marfa Ignatyevna. She could never get accustomed to it. She jumped up and ran half awake to Smerdyakov's room. But it was dark there, and she could only hear the invalid beginning to gasp and struggle. Then Marfa Ignatyevna herself screamed out and was going to call her husband, but suddenly realized that when she had got up, he was not beside her in bed. She ran back to the bedstead and began groping with her hands, but the bed was really empty. Then he must have gone out. Where? She ran to the steps and timidly called him. She got no answer, of course, but she caught the sound of groans far away in the garden, in the darkness. She listened. The groans were repeated, and it was evident they came from the garden. Good Lord, just as it was with Lizaveta Smerdyashchaya, she thought distractedly. She went timidly down the steps and saw that the gate into the garden was open. "He must be out there, poor dear," she thought. She went up to the gate, and all at once she distinctly heard Grigori calling her by name. "Marfa! Marfa!" in a weak, moaning, dreadful voice. "Lord, preserve us from harm," Marfa Ignatyevna murmured, and ran towards the voice, and that was how she found Grigori. But she found him not by the fence where he had been knocked down, but about 20 paces off. It appeared later that he had crawled away on coming to himself, and probably had been a long time getting so far, losing consciousness several times. She noticed at once that he was covered with blood, and screamed at the top of her voice. Grigori was muttering incoherently. "He has murdered. His father murdered. Why scream, silly? Run! Fetch someone!" But Marfa continued screaming, and seeing that her master's window was open, and that there was a candle alight in the window, she ran there and began calling Fyodor Pavlovitch. But peeping in at the window, she saw a fearful sight. Her master was lying on his back, motionless on the floor. His light-coloured dressing gown and white shirt were soaked with blood. The candle on the table brightly lighted up the blood and the motionless, dead face of Fyodor Pavlovitch. Terror-stricken, Marfa rushed away from the window, ran out of the garden, drew the bolt of the big gate, and ran headlong by the back way to the neighbour, Maria Kondratyevna. Both mother and daughter were asleep, but they waked up at Marfa's desperate and persistent screaming and knocking at the shutter. Marfa, shrieking and screaming incoherently, managed to tell them the main fact, and to beg for assistance. It happened that Foma had come back from his wanderings and was staying the night with them. They got him up immediately, and all three ran to the scene of the crime. On the way, Maria Kondratyevna remembered that at about 8 o'clock she heard a dreadful scream from their garden, and this was no doubt Grigori's scream, "Parricide!" uttered when he caught hold of Mitya's leg. "Some one person screamed out and then was silent," Maria Kondratyevna explained as she ran. Running to the place where Grigori lay, the two women, with the help of Foma, carried him to the lodge. They lighted a candle, and saw that Smerdyakov was no better, that he was writhing in convulsions, his eyes fixed in a squint, and that foam was flowing from his lips. They moistened Grigori's forehead with water mixed with vinegar, and the water revived him at once. He asked immediately, "Is the master murdered?" Then Foma and both the women ran to the house, and saw this time that not only the window, but also the door into the garden was wide open, though Fyodor Pavlovitch had for the last week locked himself in every night, and did not allow even Grigori to come in on any pretext. Seeing that door open, they were afraid to go in to Fyodor Pavlovitch, for fear anything should happen afterwards. And when they returned to Grigori, the old man told them to go straight to the police captain. Maria Kondratyevna ran there and gave the alarm to the whole party at the police captain's. She arrived only 5 minutes before Piotr Ilyitch, so that his story came, not as his own surmise and theory, but as the direct confirmation by a witness of the theory held by all as to the identity of the criminal. A theory he had in the bottom of his heart refused to believe till that moment. It was resolved to act with energy. The deputy police inspector of the town was commissioned to take 4 witnesses, to enter Fyodor Pavlovitch's house, and there to open an inquiry on the spot, according to the regular forms, which I will not go into here. The district doctor, a zealous man, new to his work, almost insisted on accompanying the police captain, the prosecutor, and the investigating lawyer. I will note briefly that Fyodor Pavlovitch was found to be quite dead, with his skull battered in. But with what? Most likely with the same weapon with which Grigori had been attacked. And immediately that weapon was found. Grigori, to whom all possible medical assistance was at once given, described in a weak and breaking voice how he had been knocked down. They began looking with a lantern by the fence, and found the brass pestle dropped in a most conspicuous place on the garden path. There were no signs of disturbance in the room where Fyodor Pavlovitch was lying, but by the bed, behind the screen, they picked up from the floor a big and thick envelope with the inscription, "A present of 3,000 roubles for my angel Grushenka, if she is willing to come," and below that had been added by Fyodor Pavlovitch, "For my little chicken." There were 3 seals of red sealing wax on the envelope, but it had been torn open and was empty. The money had been removed. They found also on the floor a piece of narrow pink ribbon with which the envelope had been tied up. One piece of Piotr Ilyitch's evidence made a great impression on the prosecutor and the investigating magistrate, namely his idea that Dmitri Fyodorovitch would shoot himself before daybreak, that he had resolved to do so, had spoken of it to Ilyitch, had taken the pistols, loaded them before him, written a letter, put it in his pocket, etc. When Piotr Ilyitch, though still unwilling to believe in it, threatened to tell someone so as to prevent the suicide, Mitya had answered, grinning, "You'll be too late." So they must make haste to Mokroe to find the criminal before he really did shoot himself. That's clear, repeated the prosecutor in great excitement. That's just the way with mad fellows like that. I shall kill myself tomorrow, so I'll make merry till I die. The story of how he had bought the wine and provisions excited the prosecutor more than ever. Do you remember the fellow that murdered a merchant called old Sofiev, gentlemen? He stole 1,500, went at once to have his hair curled, and then, without even hiding the money, carried it almost in his hand in the same way. He went off to the girls. All were delayed, however, by the inquiry, the search, and the formalities, etc., in the house of Fyodor Pavlovitch. It all took time, and so 2 hours before starting, they sent on ahead to Mokroe the officer of the rural police, Mavriky Mavrikyevich Shmertsov, who had arrived in the town the morning before to get his pay. He was instructed to avoid raising the alarm when he reached Mokroe, but to keep constant watch over the criminal till the arrival of the proper authorities, to procure also witnesses for the arrest, police constables, and so on. Mavriky Mavrikyevich did as he was told, preserving his incognito, and giving no one but his old acquaintance, Trifon Borisovitch, the slightest hint of his secret business. He had spoken to him just before Mitya met the landlord in the balcony, looking for him in the dark, and noticed at once a change in Trifon Borisovitch's face and voice. So neither Mitya nor anyone else knew that he was being watched. The box with the pistols had been carried off by Trifon Borisovitch and put in a suitable place. Only after 4 o'clock, almost at sunrise, all the officials, the police captain, the prosecutor, the investigating lawyer, drove up in 2 carriages, each drawn by 3 horses. The doctor remained at Fyodor Pavlovitch's to make a post-mortem next day on the body, but he was particularly interested in the condition of the servant, Smerdyakov. Such violent and protracted epileptic fits, recurring continually for 24 hours, are rarely to be met with, and are of interest to science, he declared enthusiastically to his companions, and as they left, they laughingly congratulated him on his find. The prosecutor and the investigating lawyer distinctly remembered the doctor's saying that Smerdyakov could not outlive the night. After these long, but I think necessary explanations, we will return to that moment of our tale at which we broke off. End of chapter 2 of book 9. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.
Book 9, Chapter 3 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Sherman. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 3. The Sufferings of a Soul, the first ordeal. And so Mitya sat looking wildly at the people round him, not understanding what was said to him. Suddenly he got up, flung up his hands, and shouted aloud, "I'm not guilty! I'm not guilty of that blood! I'm not guilty of my father's blood! I meant to kill him, but I'm not guilty, not I!" But he had hardly said this before Grushenka rushed from behind the curtain and flung herself at the police captain's feet. "It was my fault, mine, my wickedness!" she cried in a heart-rending voice, bathed in tears, stretching out her clasped hands towards them. "He did it through me. I tortured him and drove him to it. I tortured that poor old man that's dead, too, in my wickedness, and brought him to this. It's my fault, mine first, mine most, my fault!" "Yes, it's your fault. You're the chief criminal, you fury, you harlot! You're the most to blame!" shouted the police captain, threatening her with his hand. But he was quickly and resolutely suppressed. The prosecutor positively seized hold of him. "This is absolutely irregular, Mikhail Makarovitch," he cried. "You are positively hindering the inquiry. You're ruining the case," he almost gasped. "Follow the regular course, follow the regular course," cried Nikolai Parfenovitch, fearfully excited too. "Otherwise it's absolutely impossible." "Judge us together," Grushenka cried frantically, still kneeling. "Punish us together. I will go with him now, if it's to death." "Grusha, my life, my blood, my holy one!" Mitya fell on his knees beside her and held her tight in his arms. "Don't believe her," he cried. "She's not guilty of anything, of any blood, of anything." He remembered afterwards that he was forcibly dragged away from her by several men, and that she was led out, and that when he recovered himself he was sitting at the table. Beside him and behind him stood the men with metal plates. Facing him on the other side of the table sat Nikolai Parfenovitch, the investigating lawyer. He kept persuading him to drink a little water out of a glass that stood on the table. "That will refresh you. That will calm you. Be calm. Don't be frightened," he added extremely politely. Mitya, he remembered it afterwards, became suddenly intensely interested in his big rings, one with an amethyst and another with a transparent bright yellow stone of great brilliance. And long afterwards he remembered with wonder how those rings had riveted his attention through all those terrible hours of interrogation, so that he was utterly unable to tear himself away from them and dismiss them as things that had nothing to do with his position. On Mitya's left side, in the place where Maximov had been sitting at the beginning of the evening, the prosecutor was now seated, and on Mitya's right hand, where Grushenka had been, was a rosy-cheeked young man in a sort of shabby hunting jacket, with ink and paper before him. This was the secretary of the investigating lawyer, who had brought him with him. The police captain was now standing by the window at the other end of the room, beside Kalganov, who was sitting there. "Drink some water," said the investigating lawyer softly, for the 10th time. "I have drunk it, gentlemen, I have. But come, gentlemen, crush me, punish me, decide my fate," cried Mitya, staring with terribly fixed, wide-open eyes at the investigating lawyer. "So you positively declare that you are not guilty of the death of your father, Fyodor Pavlovitch?" asked the investigating lawyer, softly but insistently. "I am not guilty. I am guilty of the blood of another old man, but not of my father's. And I weep for it. I killed the old man and knocked him down. But it's hard to have to answer for that murder with another, a terrible murder of which I am not guilty. It's a terrible accusation, gentlemen, a knock-down blow. But who has killed my father? Who has killed him? Who can have killed him if I didn't? It's marvellous, extraordinary, impossible." "Yes, who can have killed him?" the investigating lawyer was beginning, but Ippolit Kirillovitch, the prosecutor, glancing at him, addressed Mitya. "You need not worry yourself about the old servant, Grigory Vassilyevitch. He is alive, he has recovered, and in spite of the terrible blows inflicted, according to his own and your evidence, by you, there seems no doubt that he will live, so the doctor says, at least." "Alive? He's alive?" cried Mitya, flinging up his hands. His face beamed. "Lord, I thank thee for the miracle thou hast wrought for me, a sinner and evildoer. That's an answer to my prayer. I've been praying all night." And he crossed himself 3 times. He was almost breathless. So from this Grigori we have received such important evidence concerning you that—" The prosecutor would have continued, but Mitya suddenly jumped up from his chair. "1 minute, gentlemen, for God's sake, 1 minute, I will run to her." "Excuse me, at this moment it's quite impossible," Nikolai Parfenovitch almost shrieked. He too leaped to his feet. Mitya was seized by the men with the metal plates, but he sat down of his own accord. "Gentlemen, what a pity! I wanted to see her for 1 minute only. I wanted to tell her that it has been washed away. It has gone, that blood that was weighing on my heart all night, and that I am not a murderer now. Gentlemen, she is my betrothed," he said ecstatically and reverently, looking round at them all. "Oh, thank you, gentlemen. Oh, in 1 minute you have given me new life, new heart. That old man used to carry me in his arms, gentlemen. He used to wash me in the tub when I was a baby 3 years old, abandoned by everyone. He was like a father to me." "And so you," the investigating lawyer began. "Allow me, gentlemen, allow me 1 minute more," interposed Mitya, putting his elbows on the table and covering his face with his hands. "Let me have a moment to think. Let me breathe, gentlemen. All this is horribly upsetting, horribly. A man is not a drum, gentlemen." "Drink a little more water," murmured Nikolai Parfenovitch. Mitya took his hands from his face and laughed. His eyes were confident. He seemed completely transformed in a moment. His whole bearing was changed. He was once more the equal of these men, with all of whom he was acquainted, as though they had all met the day before, when nothing had happened, at some social gathering. We may note in passing that on his first arrival Mitya had been made very welcome at the police captain's. But later, during the last month especially, Mitya had hardly called at all, and when the police captain met him in the street, for instance, Mitya noticed that he frowned and only bowed out of politeness. His acquaintance with the prosecutor was less intimate, though he sometimes paid his wife, a nervous and fanciful lady, visits of politeness, without quite knowing why, and she always received him graciously, and had for some reason taken an interest in him up to the last. He had not had time to get to know the investigating lawyer, though he had met him and talked to him twice, each time about the fair sex. "You're a most skilful lawyer, I see, Nikolai Parfenovitch," cried Mitya, laughing gaily. "But I can help you now. Oh, gentlemen, I feel like a new man. And don't be offended at my addressing you so simply and directly. I'm rather drunk, too, I'll tell you that frankly. I believe I've had the honour and pleasure of meeting you, Nikolai Parfenovitch, at my kinsman Musov's. Gentlemen, I don't pretend to be on equal terms with you. I understand, of course, in what character I am sitting before you. Oh, of course, there's a horrible suspicion hanging over me. If Grigori has given evidence, a horrible suspicion. It's awful, awful, I understand that. But to business, gentlemen, I am ready, and we will make an end of it in 1 moment, for listen, gentlemen. Since I know I'm innocent, we can put an end to it in a minute, can't we? Can't we?" Mitya spoke much and quickly, nervously and effusively, as though he positively took his listeners to be his best friends. "So, for the present, we will write that you absolutely deny the charge brought against you," said Nikolai Parfenovitch, impressively, and bending down to the secretary, he dictated to him in an undertone what to write. "Write it down? You want to write that down? Well, write it. I consent. I give my full consent, gentlemen. Only, do you see? Stay, write this. Of disorderly conduct I am guilty. Of violence on a poor old man I am guilty. And there is something else at the bottom of my heart of which I am guilty too. But that you need not write down." He turned suddenly to the secretary. "That's my personal life, gentlemen. That doesn't concern you. The bottom of my heart, that's to say. But of the murder of my old father I'm not guilty. That's a wild idea. It's quite a wild idea. I will prove you that, and you'll be convinced directly. You will laugh, gentlemen. You'll laugh yourselves at your suspicion." "Be calm, Dmitri Fyodorovitch," said the investigating lawyer, evidently trying to allay Mitya's excitement by his own composure. "Before we go on with our inquiry, I should like, if you will consent to answer, to hear you confirm the statement that you disliked your father, Fyodor Pavlovitch, that you were involved in continual disputes with him. Here at least, a quarter of an hour ago, you exclaimed that you wanted to kill him. I didn't kill him, you said, but I wanted to kill him." "Did I exclaim that? "Ah, that may be so, gentlemen, yes. Unhappily I did want to kill him. Many times I wanted to. Unhappily. You wanted to. Would you consent to explain what motives precisely led you to such a sentiment of hatred for your parent?" "What is there to explain, gentlemen?" Mitya shrugged his shoulders sullenly, looking down. "I have never concealed my feelings. All the town knows about it. Everyone knows in the tavern. Only lately I declared him in Father Zosima's cell, and the very same day, in the evening, I beat my father. I nearly killed him, and I swore I'd come again and kill him, before witnesses. Oh, 1,000 witnesses. I've been shouting it aloud for the last month. Anyone can tell you that. The fact stares you in the face. It speaks for itself. It cries aloud. But feelings, gentlemen, feelings are another matter. You see, gentlemen," Mitya frowned, "it seemed to me that about feelings you've no right to question me. I know that you are bound by your office. I quite understand that. But that's my affair, my private, intimate affair. Yet, since I haven't concealed my feelings in the past, in the tavern, for instance, I've talked to everyone, so I won't make a secret of it now. You see, I understand, gentlemen, that there are terrible facts against me in this business. I told everyone that I'd kill him, and now, all of a sudden, he's been killed. So it must have been me. I can make allowances for you, gentlemen. I can quite make allowances. I'm struck all of a heap myself. For who can have murdered him if not I? That's what it comes to, isn't it? If not I, who can it be? Who? Gentlemen, I want to know. I insist on knowing," he exclaimed suddenly. "Where was he murdered? How was he murdered? How and with what? Tell me," he asked quickly, looking at the two lawyers. "We found him in his study, lying on his back on the floor with his head battered in," said the prosecutor. "That's horrible." Mitya shuddered, and putting his elbows on the table, hid his face in his right hand. "We will continue," interposed Nikolai Parfenovitch. "So what was it that impelled you to this sentiment of hatred? You have asserted in public, I believe, that it was based upon jealousy." "Well, yes, jealousy. Not only jealousy." "Disputes about money?" "Yes, about money, too." "There was a dispute about 3,000 roubles, I think, which you claimed as part of your inheritance." 3,000! More!" cried Mitya hotly. "More than 6,000, more than 10, perhaps. I told everyone so, shouted it at them. But I made up my mind to let it go at 3,000. I was desperately in need of that 3,000. So the bundle of notes for 3,000 that I knew he kept under his pillow, ready for Grushenka, I considered as simply stolen from me. Yes, gentlemen, I looked upon it as mine, as my own property." The prosecutor looked significantly at the investigating lawyer, and had time to wink at him on the sly. "We will return to that subject later," said the lawyer promptly. "You will allow us to note that point and write it down, that you looked upon that money as your own property?" "Write it down, by all means. I know that's another fact that tells against me, but I'm not afraid of facts, and I tell them against myself. Do you hear? Do you know, gentlemen, you take me for a different sort of man from what I am," he added, suddenly gloomy and dejected. "You have to deal with a man of honour, a man of the highest honour. Above all, don't lose sight of it. A man who's done a lot of nasty things, but has always been and still is honourable at bottom in his inner being. I don't know how to express it. That's just what made me wretched all my life, that I yearned to be honourable, that I was, so to say, a martyr to a sense of honour, seeking for it with the lantern of Diogenes. And yet all my life I've been doing filthy things, like all of us, gentlemen. That is like me alone. That was a mistake, like me alone, me alone. Gentlemen, my head aches." His brows contracted with pain. "You see, gentlemen, I couldn't bear the look of him. There was something in him ignoble, impudent, trampling on everything sacred, something sneering and irreverent, loathsome. But now that he's dead, I feel differently." "How do you mean?" "I don't feel differently, but I wish I hadn't hated him so." "You feel penitent?" "No, not penitent. Don't write that. I'm not much good myself. I'm not very beautiful, so I had no right to consider him repulsive. That's what I mean. Write that down if you like." Saying this, Mitya became very mournful. He had grown more and more gloomy as the inquiry continued. At that moment another unexpected scene followed. Though Grushenka had been removed, she had not been taken far away, only into the room next but one from the blue room, in which the examination was proceeding. It was a little room with one window, next beyond the large room in which they had danced and feasted so lavishly. She was sitting there with no one by her but Maximov, who was terribly depressed, terribly scared, and clung to her side as though for security. At their door stood one of the peasants with a metal plate on his breast. Grushenka was crying, and suddenly her grief was too much for her. She jumped up, flung up her arms, and with a loud wail of sorrow rushed out of the room to him, to her Mitya, and so unexpectedly that they had not time to stop her. Mitya, hearing her cry, trembled, jumped up, and with a yell rushed impetuously to meet her, not knowing what he was doing. But they were not allowed to come together, though they saw one another. He was seized by the arms. He struggled and tried to tear himself away. It took 3 or 4 men to hold him. She was seized too, and he saw her stretching out her arms to him, crying aloud as they carried her away. When the scene was over, he came to himself again, sitting in the same place as before, opposite the investigating lawyer, and crying out to them, "What do you want with her? Why do you torment her? She's done nothing, nothing!" The lawyers tried to soothe him. About 10 minutes passed like this. At last Mihail Makarovitch, who had been absent, came hurriedly into the room, and said in a loud and excited voice to the prosecutor, "She's been removed. She's downstairs. Will you allow me to say one word to this unhappy man, gentlemen? In your presence, gentlemen, in your presence." "By all means, Mihail Makarovitch," answered the investigating lawyer. "In the present case we have nothing against it." "Listen, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, my dear fellow," began the police captain, and there was a look of warm, almost fatherly feeling for the luckless prisoner on his excited face. "I took your Agrafena Alexandrovna downstairs myself, and confided her to the care of the landlord's daughters, and that old fellow Maximov is with her all the time, and I soothed her, do you hear? I soothed and calmed her. I impressed on her that you have to clear yourself, so she mustn't hinder you, must not depress you, or you may lose your head and say the wrong thing in your evidence. In fact, I talked to her, and she understood. She's a sensible girl, my boy, a good-hearted girl. She would have kissed my old hands begging help for you. She sent me herself to tell you not to worry about her. And I must go, my dear fellow, I must go and tell her that you are calm and comforted about her, and so you must be calm, do you understand? I was unfair to her. She is a Christian soul, gentlemen. Yes, I tell you, she's a gentle soul, and not to blame for anything. So what am I to tell her, Dmitri Fyodorovitch? Will you sit quiet or not?" The good-natured police captain said a great deal that was irregular, but Grushenka's suffering, a fellow creature's suffering, touched his good-natured heart, and tears stood in his eyes. Mitya jumped up and rushed towards him. "Forgive me, gentlemen! Oh, allow me!" he cried. "You've the heart of an angel, Mihail Makarovitch. I thank you for her. I will be calm, cheerful, in fact. Tell her in the kindness of your heart that I am cheerful, quite cheerful, that I shall be laughing in a minute, knowing that she has a guardian angel like you. I shall have done with all this directly, and as soon as I'm free I'll be with her. She'll see. Let her wait. Gentlemen," he said, turning to the 2 lawyers, "now I'll open my whole soul to you. I'll pour out everything. We'll finish this off directly, finish it off gaily. We shall laugh at it in the end, shan't we? But, gentlemen, that woman is the queen of my heart. Oh, let me tell you that. That one thing I'll tell you now. I see I'm with honourable men. She is my light. She is my holy one. And if only you knew. Did you hear her cry, 'I'll go to death with you'? And what have I, a penniless beggar, done for her? Why such love for me? How can a clumsy, ugly brute like me, with my ugly face, deserve such love that she is ready to go to exile with me? And how she fell down at your feet for my sake just now! And yet she's proud and has done nothing. How can I help adoring her? How can I help crying out and rushing to her as I did just now? Gentlemen, forgive me, but now I am comforted." And he sank back in his chair, and covering his face with his hands, burst into tears. But they were happy tears. He recovered himself instantly. The old police captain seemed much pleased, and the lawyers also. They felt that the examination was passing into a new phase. When the police captain went out, Mitya was positively gay. "Now, gentlemen, I am at your disposal, entirely at your disposal. And if it were not for all these trivial details, we should understand one another in a minute. I'm at those details again. I'm at your disposal, gentlemen. But I declare that we must have mutual confidence, you in me and I in you, or there'll be no end to it. I speak in your interests. To business, gentlemen, to business, and don't rummage in my soul, don't tease me with trifles, but only ask me about facts and what matters, and I will satisfy you at once, and damn the details." So spoke Mitya. The interrogation began again. End of chapter 3 of book 9.
Book 9, Chapter 4 of The Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nikki Sullivan. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 4. The Second Ordeal. "You don't know how you encourage us, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, by your readiness to answer," said Nikolai Parfenovitch, with an animated air, and obvious satisfaction beaming in his very prominent, short-sighted, light gray eyes, from which he had removed his spectacles a moment before. "And you have made a very just remark about the mutual confidence, without which it is sometimes positively impossible to get on in cases of such importance, if the suspected party really hopes and desires to defend himself, and is in the position to do so. We, on our side, will do everything in our power, and you can see for yourself how we are conducting the case. You approve, Ippolit Kirillovitch?" He turned to the prosecutor. "Oh, undoubtedly," replied the prosecutor. His tone was somewhat cold compared with Nikolai Parfenovitch's impulsiveness. "I will note once for all that Nikolai Parfenovitch, who had but lately arrived among us, had from the first felt marked respect for Ippolit Kirillovitch, our prosecutor, and had become almost his bosom friend. He was almost the only person who put implicit faith in Ippolit Kirillovitch's extraordinary talents as a psychologist and orator, and in the justice of his grievance. He had heard of him in Petersburg. On the other hand, young Nikolai Parfenovitch was the only person in the whole world whom our unappreciated prosecutor genuinely liked. On their way to Mokrow they had time to come to an understanding about the present case, and now as they sat at the table, the sharp-witted junior caught and interpreted every indication of his senior colleague's face. Half a word, a glance, or a wink. "Gentlemen, only let me tell my own story, and don't interrupt me with trivial questions, and I'll tell you everything in a moment," said Mitya excitedly. "Excellent, thank you. But before we proceed to listen to your communication, will you allow me to inquire as to another little fact of great interest to us? I mean the 10 roubles you borrowed yesterday at about 5 o'clock on the security of your pistols from your friend Pyotr Ilyitch Perhotin. I pledged them, gentlemen. I pledged them for 10 roubles. What more? That's all about it. As soon as I got back to town, I pledged them." "You got back to town? Then you had been out of town?" "Yes, I went on a journey of 4 versts into the country. Didn't you know?" The prosecutor and Nikolai Parfenovitch exchanged glances. "Well, how would it be if you began your story with a systematic description of all you did yesterday, from the morning onwards? Allow us, for instance, to inquire why you were absent from the town, and just when you left, and when you came back. All those facts." "You should have asked me like that from the beginning," cried Mitya, laughing aloud. "And, if you like, We won't begin from yesterday, but from the morning of the day before. Then you'll understand how, why, and where I went. I went the day before yesterday, gentlemen, to a merchant of the town called Samsonov to borrow 3,000 rubles from him on safe security. And it was a pressing matter, gentlemen. It was a sudden necessity. Allow me to interrupt you, the prosecutor put in politely. Why were you in such pressing need for just that sum, 3,000? Oh, gentlemen, you don't need to go into details how, when, and why just so much money, and not so much money, and all that rigmarole. Why, it'll run to 3 volumes, and then you'll want an epilogue. Mitya said all this with the good-natured but impatient familiarity of a man who is anxious to tell the whole truth and is full of the best intentions. Gentlemen, he corrected himself hurriedly, don't be vexed with me for my restiveness, I beg you again. Believe me once more, I feel the greatest respect for you and understand the true position of affairs. Don't think I'm drunk. I'm quite sober now. And besides, being drunk would be of no hindrance. It's with me, you know, like the saying, when he is sober, he is a fool. When he is drunk, he is a wise man. But I see, gentlemen, it's not the proper thing to make jokes to you. Till we've had our explanation, I mean. And I've my own dignity to keep up, too. I quite understand the difference, for the moment. I am, after all, in the position of a criminal, and so, far from being on equal terms with you. And it's your business to watch me. I can't expect you to pat me on the head for what I did to Grigory, for one can't break old men's heads with impunity. I suppose you'll put me away for him for 6 months, or a year perhaps, in a house of correction. I don't know what the punishment is, but it will be without loss of my rank, won't it? So you see, gentlemen, I understand the distinction between us. But you must see that you could puzzle God himself with such questions. How did you step? Where did you step? When did you step? And on what did you step? I shall get mixed up if you go on like this. And you will put it all down against me. And what will that lead to? To nothing. And even if it's nonsense I'm talking now, let me finish, and you, gentlemen, being men of honor and refinement, will forgive me. I'll finish by asking you, gentlemen, to drop that conventional method of questioning. I mean, beginning from some miserable trifle, how I got up, what I had for breakfast, how I spat, and where I spat, and so distracting the attention of the criminal, suddenly stun him with an overwhelming question, whom did you murder? Whom did you rob? Ha! That's the regulation method. That's where all the cunning comes in. You can put peasants off their guard like that, but not me. I know the tricks. I've been in this service, too. You're not angry, gentlemen. You'll forgive my impertinence? He cried, looking at them with a good nature that was almost surprising. It's only Mitya Karamazov, you know, so you can overlook it. It would be inexcusable in a sensible man, but you can forgive it in Mitya. Nikolai Parfenovitch listened, and laughed too. Though the prosecutor did not laugh, he kept his eyes fixed keenly on Mitya, as though anxious not to miss the least syllable, the slightest movement, the smallest twitch of any feature of his face. "That's how we've treated you from the beginning," said Nikolai Parfenovitch, still laughing. "We haven't tried to put you out by asking how you got up in the morning, and what you had for breakfast. We began indeed with questions of the greatest importance." "I understand. I saw it and appreciated it, and I appreciate still more your present kindness to me, an unprecedented kindness worthy of your noble hearts. We three here are gentlemen, and let everything be on the footing of mutual confidence between educated, well-bred people, who have the common bond of noble birth and honor. In any case, allow me to look upon you as my best friends at this moment of my life, at this moment when my honor is assailed. That's no offense to you, gentlemen, is it?" "On the contrary, you've expressed all that so well, Dmitri Fyodorovitch," Nikolai Parfenovitch answered with dignified approbation. "And enough of those trivial questions, gentlemen, all those tricky questions," cried Mitya enthusiastically, "or there's simply no knowing where we shall get to, is there?" "I will follow your sensible advice entirely," the prosecutor interposed, addressing Mitya. I don't withdraw my question, however. It is now of vital importance to us to know exactly why you needed that sum. I mean precisely 3,000. Why I needed it? Oh, for one thing and another. Well, it was to pay a debt. A debt to whom? That I absolutely refuse to answer, gentlemen. Not because I couldn't, or because I shouldn't dare, or because it would be damaging. For it's all a paltry matter and absolutely trifling, but I won't, because it's a matter of principle. That's my private life, and I won't allow any intrusion into my private life. That's my principle. Your question has no bearing on the case, and whatever has nothing to do with the case is my private affair. I wanted to pay a debt. I wanted to pay a debt of honor, but to whom? I won't say. Allow me to make a note of that, said the prosecutor. By all means, write down that I won't say, that I won't. Write that I should think it dishonorable to say. You can write it. You've nothing else to do with your time. Allow me to caution you, sir, and to remind you once more, if you are unaware of it, the prosecutor began, with a peculiar and stern impressiveness, that you have a perfect right not to answer the questions put to you now, and we on our side have no right to extort any answer from you if you decline to give it for one reason or another. That is entirely a matter of your personal decision. But it is our duty, on the other hand, in such cases as the present, to explain and set before you the degree of injury you will be doing to yourself by refusing to give this or that piece of evidence. After which I will beg you to continue. Gentlemen, I'm not angry. Mitya muttered in a rather disconcerted tone. Well, gentlemen, you see, that Samsonov to whom I went then. We will, of course, not reproduce his account of what is known to the reader already. Mitya was impatiently anxious not to omit the slightest detail. At the same time, he was in a hurry to get it over. But as he gave his evidence, it was written down, and therefore they had continually to pull him up. Mitya disliked this, but submitted, got angry, though still good-humoredly. He did, it is true, exclaim from time to time, "Gentlemen, that is enough to make an angel out of Patience!" or, "Gentlemen, it is no good your irritating me." But even though he exclaimed, he still preserved for a time his genial, expansive mood. So he told them how Samsonov had made a fool of him 2 days before. He had completely realized by now that he had been fooled. The sale of his watch for 6 rubles to obtain money for the journey was something new to the lawyers. They were at once greatly interested, and even, to Mitya's intense indignation, thought it necessary to write the fact down as a secondary confirmation of the circumstance that he had hardly a farthing in his pocket at the time. Little by little, Mitya began to grow surly. Then, after describing his journey to see Legave, the night spent in the stifling hut, and so on, he came to his return to the town. Here he began, without being particularly urged, to give a minute account of the agonies of jealousy he endured on Grushenka's account. He was heard with silent attention. They inquired particularly into the circumstance of his having a place of ambush in Maria Kondratyevna's house at the back of Fyodor Pavlovitch's garden to keep watch on Grushenka, and of Smerdyakov's bringing him information. They laid particular stress on this, and noted it down. Of his jealousy he spoke warmly and at length, and though inwardly ashamed at exposing his most intimate feelings to public ignominy, so to speak, he evidently overcame his shame in order to tell the truth. The frigid severity with which the investigating lawyer, and still more the prosecutor, stared intently at him as he told his story disconcerted him, at last, considerably. That boy, Nikolai Parfenovitch, to whom I was talking nonsense about women only a few days ago, and that sickly prosecutor are not worth my telling this to. he reflected mournfully. "It's ignominious. Be patient, humble, hold thy peace." He wound up his reflections with that line, but he pulled himself together to go on again. When he came to telling of his visit to Madame Holikov, he regained his spirits and even wished to tell a little anecdote of that lady which had nothing to do with the case. But the investigating lawyer stopped him and civilly suggested that he should pass on to more essential matters. At last, when he described his despair and told them how, when he left Madame Holikov, he thought that he'd get 3,000 if he had to murder someone to do it, they stopped him again and noted down that he had meant to murder someone. Mitya let them write it without protest. At last he reached the point in his story when he learned that Grushenka had deceived him and had returned from Samsonov's as soon as he left her there, though she had said that she would stay there till midnight. "If I didn't kill Fenya then, gentlemen, it was only because I hadn't time," broke from him suddenly at that point in his story. That, too, was carefully written down. Mitya waited gloomily and was beginning to tell how he ran into his father's garden when the investigating lawyer suddenly stopped him, and opening the big portfolio that lay on the sofa beside him, he brought out the brass pestle. "Do you recognize this object?" he asked, showing it to Mitya. "Oh, yes," he laughed gloomily. "Of course I recognize it. Let me have a look at it. Damn it, never mind." "You have forgotten to mention it," observed the investigating lawyer. "Hang it all, I shouldn't have concealed it from you. Do you suppose I could have managed without it? It simply escaped my memory." "Be so good as to tell us precisely how you came to arm yourself with it." "Certainly I will be so good, gentlemen." And Mitya described how he took the pestle and ran. "But what object had you in view in arming yourself with such a weapon?" "What object? No object. I just picked it up and ran off." "What for, if you had no object?" Mitya's wrath flared up. He looked intently at the boy and smiled gloomily and malignantly. He was feeling more and more ashamed at having told such people the story of his jealousy so sincerely and spontaneously. "Bother the pestle!" broke from him suddenly. "But still—" "Oh, to keep off dogs! Oh, because it was dark, in case anything turned up." "But have you ever, on previous occasions, taken a weapon with you when you went out, since you're afraid of the dark?" "Ugh, damn it all, gentlemen, there's positively no talking to you!" cried Mitya, exasperated beyond endurance, and turning to the secretary, crimson with anger, he said quickly, with a note of fury in his voice, "Write down at once, that I snatched up the pestle to go and kill my father, Fyodor Pavlovitch, by hitting him on the head with it. Well, now are you satisfied, gentlemen? Are your minds relieved?" he said, glaring defiantly at the lawyers. "We quite understand that you made that statement just now through exasperation with us and the questions we put to you, which you consider trivial though they are, in fact, essential," the prosecutor remarked dryly in reply. "Well, upon my word, gentlemen, I took the pestle. What does one pick things up for in such moments? I don't know what for. I snatched it up and ran, that's all. For to me, gentlemen, passons, or I declare I won't tell you any more." He sat with his elbows on the table and his head in his hand. He sat sideways to them and gazed at the wall, struggling against a feeling of nausea. He had, in fact, an awful inclination to get up and declare that he wouldn't say another word, not if you hang me for it. "You see, gentlemen," he said at last, with difficulty controlling himself, "you see, I listen to you and am haunted by a dream. It's a dream I have sometimes, you know. I often dream it. It's always the same, that someone is hunting me, someone I am awfully afraid of, that he's hunting me in the dark, in the night, tracking me, and I hide somewhere from him, behind a door or a cupboard, hide in a degrading way. and the worst of it is, he always knows where I am. But he pretends not to know where I am on purpose, to prolong my agony, to enjoy my terror. That's just what you're doing now. It's just like that." "Is that the sort of thing you dream about?" inquired the prosecutor. "Yes, it is. Don't you want to write it down?" said Mitya, with a distorted smile. "No need to write it down. But still, you do have curious dreams." "It's not a question of dreams now, gentlemen. This is realism. This is real life. I am a wolf, and you are the hunters. Well, hunt him down." "You are wrong to make such comparisons," began Nikolai Parfenovitch, with extraordinary softness. "No, I am not wrong at all." Mitya flared up again, although his outburst of wrath had obviously relieved his heart. He grew more good-humored at every word. "You may not trust a criminal or a man on trial tortured by your questions, but an honorable man, the honorable impulses of the heart. I say that boldly. No, that you must believe you have no right, indeed. But be silent, heart. Be patient, humble, hold thy peace. Well, shall I go on?" he broke off gloomily. "If you'll be so kind," answered Nikolai Parfenovitch. End of Chapter 4 of Book 9. Recording by Nikki Sullivan, Chicago.
Book 9, Chapter 5 of The Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 5. The Third Ordeal. Though Mitya spoke sullenly, it was evident that he was trying more than ever not to forget or miss a single detail of his story. He told them how he had leapt over the fence into his father's garden, how he had gone up to the window, told them all that had passed under the window. Clearly, precisely, distinctly, he described the feelings that troubled him during those moments in the garden when he longed so terribly to know whether Grushenka was with his father or not. But, strange to say, both the lawyers listened now with a sort of awful reserve, looked coldly at him, asked few questions. Mitya could gather nothing from their faces. "They're angry and offended," he thought. "Well, bother them." When he described how he made up his mind at last to make the signal to his father that Grushenka had come, so that he should open the window, the lawyers paid no attention to the word signal, as though they had entirely failed to grasp the meaning of the word in this connection. So much so that Mitya noticed it. Coming at last to the moment when, seeing his father peering out of the window, his hatred flared up, and he pulled the pestle out of his pocket, he suddenly, as though of design, stopped short. He sat gazing at the wall and was aware that their eyes were fixed upon him. "Well," said the investigating lawyer, "you pulled out the weapon, and what happened then?" "Then? Why, then I murdered him, hit him on the head and cracked his skull. I suppose that's your story, that's it." His eyes suddenly flashed. All his smothered wrath suddenly flamed up with extraordinary violence in his soul. "Our story," repeated Nikolai Parfenovitch. Mitya dropped his eyes and was a long time silent. "My story, gentlemen? Well, it was like this," he began softly. "Whether it was someone's tears, or my mother prayed to God, or a good angel kissed me at that instant, I don't know. But the devil was conquered. I rushed from the window and ran to the fence. My father was alarmed, and for the first time he saw me then, cried out, and sprang back from the window. I remember that very well. I ran across the garden to the fence, and there Grigory caught me when I was sitting on the fence." At that point he raised his eyes at last and looked at his listeners. They seemed to be staring at him with perfectly unruffled attention. A sort of paroxysm of indignation seized on Mitya's soul. "Why, you're laughing at me at this moment, gentlemen," he broke off suddenly. "What makes you think that?" observed Nikolai Parfenovitch. "You don't believe one word, that's why. I understand, of course, that I've come to the vital point. The old man's lying there now with his skull broken, while I, after dramatically describing how I wanted to kill him and how I snatched up the pestle, I suddenly run away from the window. A romance, poetry, as though one could believe a fellow on his word. Ha, ha! You are scoffers, gentlemen." And he swung round on his chair so that it creaked. "And did you notice," asked the prosecutor suddenly, as though not observing Mitya's excitement, "did you notice when you ran away from the window whether the door into the garden was open?" "No, it was not open." "It was not?" "It was shut. And who could open it?" "Bah, the door." "Wait a bit." He seemed suddenly to bethink himself, and almost with a start. "Why, did you find the door open?" "Yes, it was open." "Why, who could have opened it if you did not open it yourselves?" cried Mitya, greatly astonished. "The door stood open, and your father's murderer undoubtedly went in at that door, and, having accomplished the crime, went out again by the same door," the prosecutor pronounced deliberately, as though chiselling out each word separately. "That is perfectly clear. The murder was committed in the room and not through the window. That is absolutely certain from the examination that has been made, from the position of the body and everything. There can be no doubt of that circumstance." Mitya was absolutely dumbfounded. "But that's utterly impossible!" he cried, completely at a loss. I didn't go in. I tell you positively, definitely, the door was shut the whole time I was in the garden, and when I ran out of the garden, I only stood at the window and saw him through the window. That's all, that's all. I remember to the last minute, and if I didn't remember, it would be just the same. I know it, for no one knew the signals except Smerdyakov and me, and the dead man. And he wouldn't have opened the door to anyone in the world without the signals." "Signals? What signals?" asked the prosecutor with greedy, almost hysterical curiosity. He instantly lost all trace of his reserve and dignity. He asked the question with a sort of cringing timidity. He scented an important fact of which he had known nothing, and was already filled with dread that Mitya might be unwilling to disclose it. "So you didn't know?" Mitya winked at him with a malicious and mocking smile. "What if I won't tell you? From whom could you find out? No one knew about the signals except my father, Smerdyakov, and me, that was all. Heaven knew too, but it won't tell you. But it's an interesting fact. There's no knowing what you might build on it. Ha, ha! Take comfort, gentlemen, I'll reveal it. You've some foolish idea in your hearts. You don't know the man you have to deal with. You have to do with a prisoner who gives evidence against himself, to his own damage. Yes, for I am a man of honour, and you are not." The prosecutor swallowed this without a murmur. He was trembling with impatience to hear the new fact. Minutely and diffusely Mitya told them everything about the signals invented by Fyodor Pavlovitch for Smerdyakov. He told them exactly what every tap on the window meant, tapped the signals on the table, and when Nikolai Parfenovitch said that he supposed he, Mitya, had tapped the signal "Grushenka has come," when he tapped to his father, he answered precisely that he had tapped that signal, that Grushenka had come. "So now you can build up your tower," Mitya broke off, and again turned away from them contemptuously. "So no one knew of the signals but your dead father, you, and the valet Smerdyakov, and no one else?" Nikolai Parfenovitch inquired once more. Yes, the valet Smerdyakov and heaven. Write down about heaven, that may be of use. Besides, you will need God yourselves. And they had already, of course, begun writing it down. But while they wrote, the prosecutor said suddenly, as though pitching on a new idea, "But if Smerdyakov also knew of these signals, and you absolutely deny all responsibility for the death of your father, was it not he, perhaps, who knocked the signal agreed upon, induced your father to open to him, and then committed the crime?" Mitya turned upon him a look of profound irony and intense hatred. His silent stare lasted so long that it made the prosecutor blink. "You've caught the fox again," commented Mitya at last. "You've got the beast by the tail. Ha, ha! I see through you, Mr. Prosecutor. You thought, of course, that I should jump at that, catch at your prompting, and shout with all my might, 'Aye, it's Smerdyakov, he is the murderer.' Confess that that's what you thought. Confess, and I'll go on." But the prosecutor did not confess. He held his tongue and waited. "You're mistaken, I'm not going to shout, 'It's Smerdyakov,'" said Mitya. "And you don't even suspect him? Why, do you suspect him?" "He is suspected, too." Mitya fixed his eyes on the floor. "Joking apart," he brought out gloomily, "listen. From the very beginning, almost from the moment when I ran out to you from behind the curtain, I've had the thought of Smerdyakov in my mind. I've been sitting here shouting that I'm innocent, and thinking all the time, Smerdyakov. I can't get Smerdyakov out of my head. In fact, I too thought of Smerdyakov just now, but only for a second. Almost at once I thought, no, it's not Smerdyakov. It's not his doing, gentlemen." "In that case, is there anybody else you suspect?" Nikolai Parfenovitch inquired cautiously. "I don't know anyone it could be, whether it's the hand of heaven or of Satan, but not Smerdyakov," Mitya jerked out with decision. "But what makes you affirm so confidently and emphatically that it's not he?" "From my conviction, my impression. Because Smerdyakov is a man of the most abject character and a coward. He's not a coward, he's the epitome of all the cowardice in the world walking on two legs. He has the heart of a chicken. When he talked to me, he was always trembling for fear I should kill him, though I never raised my hand against him. He fell at my feet and blubbered. He has kissed these very boots, literally, beseeching me not to frighten him. Do you hear? Not to frighten him. What a thing to say. Why, I offered him money. He's a puling chicken, sickly, epileptic, weak-minded. A child of 8 could thrash him. He has no character worth talking about. It's not Smerdyakov, gentlemen. He doesn't care for money. He wouldn't take my presents. Besides, what motive had he for murdering the old man? Why, he's very likely his son, you know, his natural son. Do you know that? We have heard that legend, but you are your father's son too, you know. Yet you yourself told everyone you meant to murder him. That's a thrust, and a nasty, mean one too. I'm not afraid. Oh, gentlemen, isn't it too base of you to say that to my face? It's base, because I told you that myself. I not only wanted to murder him, but I might have done it. And what's more, I went out of my way to tell you of my own accord that I nearly murdered him. But you see, I didn't murder him. You see, my guardian angel saved me. That's what you've not taken into account. And that's why it's so base of you. For if I didn't kill him, I didn't kill him. Do you hear? I did not kill him. He was almost choking. He had not been so moved before during the whole interrogation. "And what has he told you, gentlemen? Smerdyakov, I mean?" he asked suddenly after a pause. "May I ask that question?" "You may ask any question," the prosecutor replied with frigid severity. "Any question relating to the facts of the case. And we are, I repeat, bound to answer every inquiry you make. we found the servant Smerdyakov, concerning whom you inquire, lying unconscious in his bed, in an epileptic fit of extreme severity that had recurred possibly 10 times. The doctor who was with us told us, after seeing him, that he may possibly not outlive the night. Well, if that's so, the devil must have killed him, broke suddenly from Mitya, as though until that moment he had been asking himself, was it Smerdyakov or not? We will come back to this later, Nikolai Parfenovitch decided. Now, wouldn't you like to continue your statement? Mitya asked for a rest. His request was courteously granted. After resting, he went on with his story. But he was evidently depressed. He was exhausted, mortified, and morally shaken. To make things worse, the prosecutor exasperated him, as though intentionally, by vexatious interruptions about trifling points. Scarcely had Mitya described how, sitting on the wall, he had struck Grigori on the head with the pestle, while the old man had hold of his left leg, and how he then jumped down to look at him, when the prosecutor stopped him to ask him to describe exactly how he was sitting on the wall. Oh, I was sitting like this, astride, one leg on one side of the wall and one on the other. And the pestle? The pestle was in my hand. Not in your pocket. Do you remember that precisely? Was it a violent blow you gave him? It must have been a violent one, but why do you ask? Would you mind sitting on the chair just as you sat on the wall then and showing us just how you moved your arm and in what direction? You're making fun of me, aren't you? Asked Mitya, looking haughtily at the speaker, but the latter did not flinch. Mitya turned abruptly, sat astride on his chair and swung his arm. This was how I struck him. That's how I knocked him down. What more do you want? Thank you. May I trouble you now to explain why you jumped down, with what object, and what you had in view? Oh, hang it. I jumped down to look at the man I'd hurt. I don't know what for. Though you were so excited and were running away. Yes, though I was excited and running away. You wanted to help him. Help? Yes, perhaps I did want to help him. I don't remember. You don't remember? Then you didn't quite know what you were doing. Not at all. I remember everything, every detail. I jumped down to look at him and wiped his face with my handkerchief. We have seen your handkerchief. Did you hope to restore him to consciousness? I don't know whether I hoped it. I simply wanted to make sure whether he was alive or not. Ah, you wanted to be sure. Well, what then? I'm not a doctor. I couldn't decide. I ran away thinking I'd killed him, and now he's recovered. Excellent, commented the prosecutor. Thank you. That's all I wanted. Kindly proceed. Alas, it never entered Mitya's head to tell them, though he remembered it, that he had jumped back from pity, and standing over the prostrate figure, had even uttered some words of regret. You've come to grief, old man. There's no help for it. Well, there you must lie. The prosecutor could only draw one conclusion, that the man had jumped back, at such a moment and in such excitement, simply with the object of ascertaining whether the only witness of his crime were dead, that he must therefore have been a man of great strength, coolness, decision, and foresight, even at such a moment, and so on. The prosecutor was satisfied. I've provoked the nervous fellow by trifles, and he has said more than he meant. With painful effort Mitya went on, but this time he was pulled up immediately by Nikolai Parfenovitch. How came you to run to the servant, Fedosia Markovna, with your hands so covered with blood, and as it appears your face too? Why, I didn't notice the blood at all at the time, answered Mitya. That's quite likely. It does happen sometimes. The prosecutor exchanged glances with Nikolai Parfenovitch. I simply didn't notice. You're quite right there, prosecutor, Mitya assented suddenly. Next came the account of Mitya's sudden determination to step aside and make way for their happiness. but he could not make up his mind to open his heart to them as before and tell them about the queen of his soul. He disliked speaking of her before these chilly persons who were fastening on him like bugs. And so, in response to their reiterated questions, he answered briefly and abruptly. Well, I made up my mind to kill myself. What had I left to live for? That question stared me in the face. Her first rightful lover had come back, the man who had wronged her, but who'd hurried back to offer his love after 5 years, and atone for the wrong with marriage. So I knew it was all over for me. And behind me, disgrace, and that blood, Grigori's. What had I to live for? So I went to redeem the pistols I had pledged, to load them and put a bullet in my brain tomorrow. And a grand feast the night before. Yes, a grand feast the night before. Damn it all, gentlemen, do make haste and finish it. I meant to shoot myself, not far from here and beyond the village, and I'd planned to do it at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I had a note in my pocket already. I wrote it at Perhotin's when I loaded my pistols. Here's the letter. Read it. It's not for you, I tell it, he added contemptuously. He took it from his waistcoat pocket and flung it on the table. The lawyers read it with curiosity, and, as is usual, added it to the papers connected with the case. And you didn't even think of washing your hands at Perhotin's? You were not afraid, then, of arousing suspicion? What suspicion? Suspicion or not, I should have galloped there just the same and shot myself at 5 o'clock, and you wouldn't have been in time to do anything. If it hadn't been for what's happened to my father, you would have known nothing about it and wouldn't have come here. Ah, it's the devil's doing. It was the devil murdered father. It was through the devil that you found it out so soon. How did you manage to get here so quick? It's marvellous. A dream. Mr. Perhotin informed us that when you came to him, you held in your hands, your blood-stained hands, your money, a lot of money, a bundle of 100-ruble notes, and that his servant boy saw it too. That's true, gentlemen. I remember it was so. Now, there's one little point presents itself. Can you inform us, Nikolai Parfenovitch began with extreme gentleness, where did you get so much money all of a sudden, when it appears from the facts, from the reckoning of time, that you had not been home? The prosecutor's brows contracted at the question being asked so plainly, but he did not interrupt Nikolai Parfenovitch. No, I didn't go home, answered Mitya, apparently perfectly composed, but looking at the floor. Allow me then to repeat my question, Nikolai Parfenovitch went on, as though creeping up to the subject. Where were you able to procure such a sum all at once, when, by your own confession, at 5 o'clock the same day, you... I was in want of 10 roubles, and pledged my pistols with Perhotin, and then went to Madame Hochlakov to borrow 3,000, which she wouldn't give me, and so on, and all the rest of it, Mitya interrupted sharply. Yes, gentlemen, I was in want of it, and suddenly thousands turned up. Do you know, gentlemen, you're both afraid now, what if he won't tell us where he got it? That's just how it is. I am not going to tell you, gentlemen. You've guessed right. You'll never know, said Mitya, chipping out each word with extraordinary determination. The lawyers were silent for a moment. You must understand, Mr. Karamazov, that it is of vital importance for us to know, said Nikolai Parfenovitch, softly and suavely. I understand, but I still won't tell you. The prosecutor, too, intervened, and again reminded the prisoner that he was at liberty to refuse to answer questions, if he thought it to his interest, and so on. But in view of the damage he might do himself by his silence, especially in a case of such importance as, and so on, gentlemen, and so on. Enough, I've heard that rigmarole before, Mitya interrupted again. I can see for myself how important it is, and that this is the vital point, and still I won't say. What is it to us? It's not our business, but yours. You are doing yourself harm, observed Nikolai Parfenovitch nervously. You see, gentlemen, joking apart," Mitya lifted his eyes and looked firmly at them both, "I had an inkling from the first that we should come to loggerheads at this point. But at first, when I began to give my evidence, it was all still far away and misty, it was all floating, and I was so simple that I began with the supposition of mutual confidence existing between us. Now I can see for myself that such confidence is out of the question, for in any case we were bound to come to this cursed stumbling block, and now we've come to it. It's impossible, and there's an end of it. But I don't blame you. You can't believe it all simply on my word. I understand that, of course." He relapsed into gloomy silence. "Couldn't you, without abandoning your resolution to be silent about the chief point, could you not at the same time give us some slight hint as to the nature of the motives which are strong enough to induce you to refuse to answer at a crisis so full of danger to you?" Mitya smiled mournfully, almost dreamily. "I'm much more good-natured than you think, gentlemen. I'll tell you the reason why, and give you that hint, though you don't deserve it. I won't speak of that, gentlemen, because it would be a stain on my honour. The answer to the question where I got the money would expose me to far greater disgrace than the murder and robbing of my father, if I had murdered and robbed him. That's why I can't tell you. I can't for fear of disgrace. What, gentlemen, are you going to write that down?" "Yes, we'll write it down," lisped Nikolai Parfenovitch. "You ought not to write that down about disgrace. I only told you that in the goodness of my heart. I needn't have told you. I made you a present of it, so to speak, and you pounce upon it at once. Oh, well, write what you like," he concluded with scornful disgust. "I'm not afraid of you, and I can still hold up my head before you." "And can't you tell us the nature of that disgrace?" Nikolai Parfenovitch hazarded. The prosecutor frowned darkly. No, c'est fini. Don't trouble yourselves. It's not worth while soiling one's hands. I have soiled enough, even through you as it is. You're not worth it. No one is. Enough, gentlemen. I'm not going on." This was said too peremptorily. Nikolai Parfenovitch did not insist further, but from Hippolyte Kirillovitch's eyes he saw that he had not given up hope. "Can you not at least tell us what sum you had in your hands when you went into Mr. Perchotin's? How many roubles exactly?" "I can't tell you that." "You spoke to Mr. Perchotin, I believe, of having received 3,000 from Madame Hochlakov." "Perhaps I did. Enough, gentlemen, I won't say how much I had." "Will you be so good, then, as to tell us how you came here, and what you have done since you arrived?" "Oh, you might ask the people here about that, but I'll tell you if you like." He proceeded to do so, but we won't repeat his story. He told it dryly and curtly. Of the raptures of his love he said nothing, but told them that he abandoned his determination to shoot himself owing to new factors in the case. He told the story without going into motives or details, and this time the lawyers did not worry him much. It was obvious that there was no essential point of interest to them here. "We shall verify all that. We will come back to it during the examination of the witnesses, which will of course take place in your presence," said Nikolai Parfenovitch in conclusion. "And now allow me to request you to lay on the table everything in your possession, especially all the money you still have about you." "My money, gentlemen? Certainly. I understand that that is necessary. I'm surprised, indeed, that you haven't inquired about it before. It's true I couldn't get away anywhere. I'm sitting here where I can be seen. But here's my money. Count it. Take it. That's all, I think." He turned it all out of his pockets, even the small change, 2 pieces of 20 kopecks. He pulled out of his waistcoat pocket. They counted the money, which amounted to 836 roubles and 40 kopecks. "And is that all?" asked the investigating lawyer. You stated just now in your evidence that you spent 300 roubles at Plotnikov's. You gave Pachotin 10, your driver 20. Here you lost 200. Then Nikolai Parfenovitch reckoned it all up. Mitya helped him readily. They recollected every farthing and included it in the reckoning. Nikolai Parfenovitch hurriedly added up the total. With this 800, you must have had about 1,500 at first. I suppose so, snapped Mitya. How is it they all assert there was much more? Let them assert it. But you asserted it yourself. Yes, I did too. We will compare all this with the evidence of other persons not yet examined. Don't be anxious about your money. It will be properly taken care of, and be at your disposal at the conclusion of what is beginning, if it appears, or so to speak, is proved that you have undisputed right to it. Well, and now, Nikolai Parfenovitch suddenly got up and informed Mitya firmly that it was his duty and obligation to conduct a minute and thorough search of your clothes and everything else. By all means, gentlemen, I'll turn out all my pockets, if you like. And he did, in fact, begin turning out his pockets. It will be necessary to take off your clothes, too. What? Undress? Oh, damn it! Won't you search me as I am, can't you? It's utterly impossible, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. You must take off your clothes. As you like, Mitya submitted gloomily. Only please not here, but behind the curtains. Who will search them? Behind the curtains, of course. Nikolai Parfenovitch bent his head in assent. His small face wore an expression of peculiar solemnity. End of chapter 5 of book 9. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.
Book 9, Chapter 6 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christopher Marcial. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 6. The Prosecutor Catches Mitya. Something utterly unexpected and amazing to Mitya followed. He could never, even a minute before, have conceived that anyone could behave like that to him, Mitya Karamazov. What was worst of all, there was something humiliating in it, and on their side something supercilious and scornful. It was nothing to take off his coat, but he was asked to undress further, or rather, not asked, but commanded. He quite understood that. From pride and contempt he submitted without a word. Several peasants accompanied the lawyers and remained on the same side of the curtain. To be ready if force is required, thought Mitya, and perhaps for some other reason, too. Well, must I take off my shirt, too? He asked sharply, but Nikolai Parfenovitch did not answer. He was busily engaged with the prosecutor in examining the coat, the trousers, the waistcoat, and the cap, and it was evident that they were both much interested in the scrutiny. They make no bones about it, thought Mitya. They don't keep up the most elementary politeness. I ask you for the second time, need I take off my shirt or not? He said, still more sharply and irritably. Don't trouble yourself. We will tell you what to do, Nikolai Parfenovitch said, and his voice was positively peremptory, or so it seemed to Mitya. Meantime, a consultation was going on in the undertones between the lawyers. There turned out to be on the coat, especially on the left side at the back, a huge patch of blood, dry and still stiff. There were bloodstains on the trousers, too. Nikolai Parfenovitch, moreover, in the presence of the peasant witnesses, passed his fingers along the collar, the cuffs, and all the seams of the coat and trousers, obviously looking for something. Money, of course. He didn't even hide from Mitya his suspicion that he was capable of sewing money up in his clothes. He treats me not as an officer, but as a thief, Mitya muttered to himself. They communicated their ideas to one another with amazing frankness. The secretary, for instance, who was also behind the curtain fussing about and listening, called Nikolai Parfenovitch's attention to the cap, which they were also fingering. "You remember Gridyenko, the copying clerk?" observed the secretary. "Last summer he received the wages of the whole office, and pretended to have lost the money when he was drunk. Where was it found? Why, just such pipings in his cap. The 100-ruble notes were screwed up in little rolls and sewed in the piping." Both the lawyers remembered Gridyenko's case perfectly, and so laid aside Mitya's cap, and decided that all his clothes must be more thoroughly examined later. "Excuse me," cried Nikolai Parfenovitch, suddenly noticing that the right cuff of Mitya's shirt was turned in and covered with blood. "Excuse me, what's that? Blood?" "Yes," Mitya jerked out. "That is, what blood? And why is the cuff turned in?" Mitya told him how he had got the sleeve stained with blood looking after Grigory, and had turned it inside when he was washing his hands at Perhotin's. "You must take off your shirt, too. That's very important as material evidence." Mitya flushed red and flew into a rage. "What? Am I to stay naked?" he shouted. "Don't disturb yourself. We will arrange something. And meanwhile, take off your socks." "You're not joking. Is that really necessary?" Mitya's eyes flashed. "We are in no mood for joking," answered Nikolai Parfenovitch sternly. "Well, if I must," muttered Mitya, and sitting down on the bed, he took off his socks. He felt unbearably awkward. All were clothed, while he was naked, and strange to say, when he was undressed he felt somehow guilty in their presence, and was almost ready to believe himself that he was inferior to them, and that now they had a perfect right to despise him. When all are undressed, one is somehow not ashamed. But when one's the only one undressed and everyone is looking, it's degrading. He kept repeating to himself again and again, "It's like a dream. I've somehow dreamed of being in such degrading positions." It was a misery to him to take off his socks. They were very dirty, and so were his underclothes, and now everybody could see it. And what was worse, he disliked his feet. All his life he had thought both his big toes hideous. He particularly loathed his coarse, flat, crooked nail on the right one, and now they would all see it. Feeling intolerably ashamed made him, at once and intentionally, rougher. He pulled off his shirt himself. "Would you like to look anywhere else if you're not ashamed to?" "No, there's no need to, at present." "Well, am I to stay naked like this?" he added savagely. "Yes, that can't be helped for the time. Kindly sit down here for a while. You can wrap yourself in a quilt from the bed, and I'll see to all this." All the things were shown to the witnesses. The report of the search were drawn up, and at last Nikolai Parfenovitch went out, and the clothes were carried out after him. Ippolit Kirillovitch went out too. Mitya was left alone with the peasants, who stood in silence, never taking their eyes off him. Mitya wrapped himself up in the quilt. He felt cold. His bare feet stuck out, and he couldn't pull the quilt over so as to cover them. Nikolai Parfenovitch seemed to be gone a long time, an insufferable time. "He thinks of me as a puppy," thought Mitya, gnashing his teeth. "That rotten prosecutor is gone too, contemptuous no doubt. It disgusts him to see me naked." Mitya imagined, however, that his clothes would be examined and returned to him. But what was his indignation when Nikolai Parfenovitch came back with quite different clothes, brought in behind him by a peasant. "Here are clothes for you," he observed airily, seemingly well satisfied with the success of his mission. "Mr. Kalganov has kindly provided these for this unusual emergency, as well as a clean shirt." Luckily he had them all in his trunk. "You can keep your own socks and underclothes." Mitya flew into a passion. "I won't have other people's clothes," he shouted menacingly. "Give me my own." "It's impossible." "Give me my own, damn Kalganov and his clothes too." It was a long time before they could persuade him, but they succeeded somehow in quieting him down. They impressed upon him that his clothes, being stained with blood, must be included with the other material evidence, and that they had not even the right to let him have them now, taking into consideration the possible outcome of the case. Mitya at last understood this. He subsided into gloomy silence and hurriedly dressed himself. He merely observed, as he put them on, that the clothes were much better than his old ones, and that he disliked gaining by the change. The coat was, besides, ridiculously narrow. Am I to be dressed up like a fool, for your amusement? They urged upon him again that he was exaggerating, that Kalganov was only a little taller, so that only the trousers might be a little too long. But the coat turned out to be really tight in the shoulders. "Damn it all, I can hardly button it," Mitya grumbled. "Be so good as to tell Mr. Kalganov from me that I didn't ask for his clothes, and it's not my doing that they've dressed me up like a clown. He quite understands that, and is sorry. I mean, not sorry to lend you his clothes, but sorry about all this business, mumbled Nikolai Parfenovitch. Confound his sorrow! Well, where now, or am I to go on sitting here? He was asked to go back to the other room. Mitya went in, scowling with anger, and trying to avoid looking at anyone. Dressed in another man's clothes, he felt himself disgraced, even in the eyes of the peasants and of Trifon Borisovitch, whose face appeared, for some reason, in the doorway, and vanished immediately. He's come to look at me dressed up, thought Mitya. He sat down on the same chair as before. He had an absurd, nightmarish feeling, as though he were out of his mind. Well, what now? Are you going to flog me? That's all that's left for you, he said, clenching his teeth and addressing the prosecutor. He would not turn to Nikolai Parfenovitch, as though he disdained to speak to him. He looked too closely at my socks and turned them inside out on purpose, to show everyone how dirty they were, the scoundrel. Well, now we must proceed to the examination of witnesses, observed Nikolai Parfenovitch, as though in reply to Mitya's question. Yes, said the prosecutor thoughtfully, as though reflecting on something. We've done what we could in your interest, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, Nikolai Parfenovitch went on, but having received from you such an uncompromising refusal to explain to us the source from which you obtained the money found upon you, we are, at the present moment— What is the stone in your ring? Mitya interrupted, suddenly as though awakening from a reverie. He pointed to one of the 3 rings adorning Nikolai Parfenovitch's right hand. Ring? Repeated Nikolai Parfenovitch with surprise. Yes, that one, on your middle finger, with the little veins in it. What stone is that? Mitya persisted, like a peevish child. That's a smoky topaz, said Nikolai Parfenovitch, smiling. Would you like to look at it? I'll take it off. No, don't take it off, cried Mitya fiercely, suddenly waking up and angry with himself. Don't take it off. There's no need. Damn it. Gentlemen, you've sullied my heart. Can you suppose that I would conceal it from you if I really had killed my father? That I would shuffle, lie, and hide myself? No, that's not like Dmitri Karamazov, that he couldn't do. And if I were guilty, I swear I shouldn't have waited for your coming, or for the sunrise as I meant at first, but should have killed myself before this, without waiting for the dawn. I know that about myself now. I couldn't have learned so much in 20 years as I found out in the accursed night. Been like this on this night, and at this moment sitting with you? Could I have talked like this? Could I have moved like this? Could I have looked at you, and at the world like this, if I had really been the murderer of my father, when the very thought of having accidentally killed Grigory gave me no peace all night? Not from fear, oh, not simply from fear of your punishment? The disgrace of it! And you expect me to be open with such scoffers as you, who see nothing and believe in nothing, blind moles and scoffers, and to tell you another nasty thing I've done, another disgrace, even that would save me from your accusation? No, better Siberia. The man who opened the door to my father and went in at that door, he killed him. He robbed him. Who was he? I'm racking my brains and can't think who. But I can tell you it was not Dmitri Karamazov, and that's all I can tell you. And that's enough. Enough. Leave me alone. Exile me. Punish me. But don't bother me any more. I'll say no more. Call your witnesses. Mitya uttered his sudden monologue as though he were determined to be absolutely silent for the future. The prosecutor watched him the whole time, and only when he had ceased speaking, observed, as though it were the most ordinary thing with the most frigid and composed air. Oh, about the door of which you spoke just now. We may as well inform you, by the way, now, of a very interesting piece of evidence of the greatest importance, both to you and to us. It's been given us by Grigory, the old man you wounded. On his recovery, he clearly and emphatically stated, in reply to our questions, that when, on coming out to the steps and hearing a noise in the garden, he made up his mind to go into it through the little gate which stood open, before he noticed you running, as you have told us already, in the dark from the open window where you saw your father, he, Grigory, glanced to the left, and, while noticing the open window, observed at the same time, much nearer to him, the door, standing wide open, that door which you have stated to have been shut the whole time you were in the garden. I will not conceal from you that Grigory himself confidently affirms and bears witness that you must have run from that door, though of course he did not see you do so with his own eyes, since he only noticed you first some distance away in the garden, running towards the fence. Mitya had leapt up from his chair halfway through his speech. "Nonsense!" he yelled in a sudden frenzy. "It's a barefaced lie. He couldn't have seen the door open because it was shut. He's lying. I consider it my duty to repeat that he is firm in his statement. He does not waver. He adheres to it. We've cross-examined him several times. Precisely. I've cross-examined him several times, Nikolai Parfenovitch confirmed warmly. It's false, false. It's either an attempt to slander me or the hallucination of a madman, Mitya still shouted. He's simply raving from loss of blood from the wound. He must have fancied it when he came to... He's raving. Yes, but he noticed the open door, not when he came to after his injuries, but before that, as soon as he went into the garden from the lodge. But it's false. It's false. It can't be so. He's slandering me for spite. He couldn't have seen it. I didn't come from the door, gasped Mitya. The prosecutor turned to Nikolai Parfenovitch and said to him impressively, "Confront him with it." "Do you recognize this object?" Nikolai Parfenovitch laid upon the table a large and thick official envelope, on which 3 seals still remained intact. The envelope was empty and slit open at one end. Mitya stared at it with open eyes. It must be that envelope of my father's, the envelope that contained the 3,000 rubles. And if there's inscribed on it, 'Allow me, for my little chicken.' Yes, 3,000, he shouted. Do you see? 3,000, do you see? Of course we see. But we didn't find the money in it. It was empty, and lying on the floor by the bed, behind the screen. For some seconds, Mitya stood as though thunderstruck. Gentlemen, it's Smerdyakov, he shouted suddenly at the top of his voice. It's he who's murdered him. He's robbed him. No one else knew where the old man hid the envelope. It's Smerdyakov. That's clear now. But you too knew of the envelope, and that it was under the pillow. I never knew it. I've never seen it. This is the first time I've looked at it. I've only heard of it from Smerdyakov. He was the only one who knew where the old man kept it hidden. I didn't know. Mitya was completely breathless. But you told us yourself that the envelope was under your deceased father's pillow. You especially stated that it was under the pillow, so you must have known it. We've got it written down, confirmed Nikolai Parfenovitch. Nonsense! It's absurd! I'd no idea it was under the pillow, and perhaps it wasn't under the pillow at all. It was just a chance guess that it was under the pillow. What does Smerdyakov say? Have you asked him where it was? What does Smerdyakov say? That's the chief point. And I went out of my way to tell lies against myself. I told you, without thinking, that it was under the pillow, and now you... Oh, you know how one says the wrong thing without meaning it. No one knew but Smerdyakov, only Smerdyakov, and no one else. He didn't even tell me where it was. But it's his doing. His doing. There's no doubt about it. He murdered him. That's as clear as daylight now. Mitya exclaimed more and more frantically, repeating himself incoherently, and growing more and more exasperated and excited. You must understand that, and arrest him at once. He must have killed him while I was running away and while Grigory was unconscious. That's clear now. He gave the signal, and Father opened to him, for no one but he knew the signal. And without the signal, Father would never have opened the door. But you're again forgetting the circumstances, the prosecutor observed, still speaking with the same restraint, though with a note of triumph, that there was no need to give the signal if the door already stood open when you were there, while you were in the garden. The door? The door, muttered Mitya as he stared speechless at the prosecutor. He sank back helpless in his chair. All were silent. Yes, the door. It's a nightmare. God is against me, he exclaimed, staring before him in complete stupefaction. Come, you see, the prosecutor went on with dignity, and you can judge for yourself, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. On the one hand, we have the evidence of the open door from which you ran out, a fact which overwhelms you and us. On the other side, your incomprehensible, persistent, and so to speak, obdurate silence with regard to the source from which you obtained the money which was so suddenly seen in your hands, when only 3 hours earlier, on your own showing, you pledged your pistols for the sake of 10 rubles. In view of these facts, judge for yourself. What are we to believe? What can we depend on? And don't accuse us of being frigid, cynical, scoffing people, who are incapable of believing in the generous impulses of your heart. Try to enter into our position. Mitya was indescribably agitated. He turned pale. Very well, he exclaimed suddenly. I will tell you my secret. I'll tell you where I got the money. I'll reveal my shame that I may not have to blame myself or you hereafter. And believe me, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, put in Nikolai Parfenovitch in a voice of almost pathetic delight, that every sincere and complete confession on your part at this moment may, later on, have an immense influence in your favor, and may indeed, moreover, but the prosecutor gave him a slight shove under the table, and he checked himself in time. Mitya, it is true, had not heard him. End of Chapter 6 of Book 9. Recording by Christopher Marcial. Book 9, Chapter 7 of The Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Christopher Marcial. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 7. Mitya's Great Secret Received with Hisses. Gentlemen, he began, still in the same agitation, I want to make a full confession. That money was my own. The lawyers' faces lengthened. That was not at all what they expected. How do you mean, faltered Nikolai Parfenovitch, when at 5 o'clock on the same day, from your own confession, damn 5 o'clock on the same day in my own confession. That's nothing to do with it now. That money was my own. My own. That is, stolen by me. Not mine, but stolen by me. And it was 1,500 rubles, and I had it on me all the time. All the time. But where did you get it? I took it off my neck, gentlemen, off this very neck. It was here, round my neck, sewn up in a rag, and I'd had it round my neck a long time. It's a month since I put it round my neck, to my shame and disgrace. And from whom did you appropriate it? You mean steal it? Speak out plainly now. Yes, I consider that I practically stole it. But if you prefer, I appropriated it. I consider I stole it, and last night I stole it finally. Last night? But you said that it's a month since you obtained it. Yes, but not from my father. Not from my father, don't be uneasy. I didn't steal it from my father, but from her. Let me tell you without interrupting. It's hard to do, you know. You see, a month ago, I was sent for by Katerina Ivanovna, formerly my betrothed. Do you know her? Yes, of course. I know you know her. She's a noble creature, noblest of the noble. She has hated me ever so long, oh, ever so long, and hated me with good reason. Good reason. Katerina Ivanovna? Nikolai Parfenovitch exclaimed with wonder. The prosecutor, too, stared. Oh, don't take her name in vain. I'm a scoundrel to bring her into it. Yes, I've seen that she hated me, a long while, from the very first, even that evening at my lodging. But enough, enough. You're unworthy even to know of that. No need of that all. I need only tell you that she sent for me a month ago, gave me 3,000 rubles to send to her sister and another relation in Moscow, as though she couldn't have sent it off herself. And it was just at that fatal moment in my life when in fact, when I just come to love another. Her. She's sitting down below now, Grushenka. I carried her off to Mokrow then, and wasted here in 2 days half that damn 3,000. But the other half I kept on me. Well, I've kept that other half, that 1,500, like a locket round my neck. But yesterday I undid it and spent it. What's left of it, 800 rubles, is in your hands now, Nikolai Parfenovitch. That's the change out of the 1,500 I had yesterday. Excuse me? How's that? Why, when you were here a month ago, you spent 3,000, not 1,500. Everybody knows that. Who knows it? Who counted the money? Did I let anyone count it? Why, you told everyone yourself that you'd spent exactly 3,000. It's true, I did. I told the whole town so, and the whole town said so. And here at Mokrow, too, everyone reckoned it was 3,000. Yet I didn't spend 3,000, but 1,500. And the other 1,500 I sewed into a little bag. That's how it was, gentlemen. That's where I got that money yesterday. This is almost miraculous, murmured Nikolai Parfenovitch. Allow me to inquire, observed the prosecutor at last. Have you informed anyone whatever of this circumstance before? That you had 1,500 left about you a month ago? I told no one. That's strange. Do you mean absolutely no one? Absolutely no one. No one and nobody. What was your reason for this reticence? What was your motive for making such a secret of it? To be more precise, you have told us at last your secret, in your words, so disgraceful, though in reality, that is, of course, comparingly speaking, this action, that is, the appropriation of 3,000 rubles belonging to someone else, and of course only for a time is, in my view at least, only an act of the greatest recklessness and not so disgraceful when one takes into consideration your character. Even admitting that it was an action in the highest degree discreditable, still discreditable is not disgraceful. Many people have already guessed during this last month about the 3,000 of Katerina Ivanovna's that you have spent, and I have heard the legend myself, apart from your confession. Mikhail Makarovitch, for instance, had heard it too, so that indeed it was scarcely a legend, but the gossip of the whole town. There are indications, too, if I'm not mistaken, that you confessed this yourself to someone. I mean that the money was Katerina Ivanovna's, and so it's extremely surprising to me that hitherto, that is, up to the present moment, you have made such an extraordinary secret of the 1,500 you say you put by, apparently connecting a feeling of positive horror with that secret. It's not easy to believe that it could cost you such distress to confess such a secret. You cried out just now that Siberia would be better than confessing it. The prosecutor ceased speaking. He was provoked. He did not conceal his vexation, which was almost anger, and gave vent to all his accumulated spleen, without choosing words, disconnectedly and incoherently. It's not the 1,500 that's the disgrace, but that I put it apart from the rest of the 3,000, said Mitya firmly. Why, smiled the prosecutor irritably, what is there disgraceful to your thinking in your having set aside half of the 3,000 you have discreditably, if you prefer, disgracefully appropriated? Your taking the 3,000 is more important than what you did with it. And by the way, why did you do that? Why did you set apart that half? For what purpose? For what object did you do it? Can you explain that to us? Oh, gentlemen, the purpose is the whole point, cried Mitya. I put it aside because I was vile, that is, because I was calculating, and to be calculating in such a case is vile, and that vileness has been going on a whole month. It's incomprehensible. I wonder at you, but I'll make it clearer. Perhaps it really is incomprehensible. You see, attend to what I say. I appropriate 3,000 entrusted to my honor. I spent it on a spree. Say I spent it all. And next morning I go to her and say, Katya, I've done wrong. I've squandered your 3,000. Well, is that right? No, it's not right. It's dishonest and cowardly. I'm a beast, with no more self-control than a beast. That's so, isn't it? But still, I'm not a thief. Not a downright thief, you'll admit. I squandered it, but I didn't steal it. Now a second, rather more favorable alternative. Follow me carefully, or I may get confused again. My head's going round. And so for the second alternative, I spent here only 1,500 out of the 3,000, that is, only half. Next day I go and take that half to her. Katya, take this 1,500 from me. I'm a low beast and an untrustworthy scoundrel, for I've wasted half the money, and I shall waste this too, so keep me from temptation. Well, what of that alternative? I should be a beast and a scoundrel and whatever you like, but not a thief, not altogether a thief, or I should not have brought back what was left, but have kept that too. She would see at once that since I brought back half, I should pay back what I'd spent, that I should never give up trying to, that I should work to get it and pay it back. So in that case, I should be a scoundrel, but not a thief. You may say what you like. Not a thief. I admit that there is certain distinction, said the prosecutor with a cold smile, but it's strange that you see such a vital difference. Yes, I see a vital difference. Every man may be a scoundrel, and perhaps every man is a scoundrel, but not everyone can be a thief. It takes an arch-scoundrel to be that. Oh, of course, I don't know how to make these fine distinctions. But a thief is lower than a scoundrel. That's my conviction. Listen, I carry the money about me a whole month. I may make up my mind to give it back tomorrow, and I'm a scoundrel no longer. But I cannot make up my mind, you see, though I'm making up my mind every day, and every day spurring myself on to do it. And yet for a whole month, I can't bring myself to it. You see, is that right to your thinking? Is that right? Certainly that's not right, that I can quite understand, and that I don't dispute, answered the prosecutor with reserve. And let us give up all discussions of these subtleties and distinctions, and, if you will be so kind, get back to the point. And the point is that you have still not told us, although we've asked you why, in the first place, you've halved the money, squandering one half and hiding the other. For what purpose exactly did you hide it? What did you mean to do with that 1,500? I insist upon that question, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. Yes, of course, cried Mitya, striking himself on the forehead. Forgive me, I'm worrying you, and am not explaining the chief point, or you'd understand in a minute, for it's just the motive of it that's the disgrace. You see, it was all to do with the old man, my dear father. He was always pestering Agrafena Alexandrovna, and I was jealous. I thought then she was hesitating between me and him. So I kept thinking every day, suppose she were to make up her mind all of a sudden. Suppose she were to leave off tormenting me, and were suddenly to say to me, I love you, not him. Take me to the other end of the world. And I'd only 40 kopecks. How could I take her away? What could I do? Why, I'd be lost. You see, I didn't know her then. I didn't understand her. I thought she wanted money, and that she would forgive my poverty. And so I fiendishly counted out the half of that 3,000, sewed it up, calculating on it, sewed it up before I was drunk, and after I'd sewn it up, I went off to get drunk on the rest. Yes, that was base. Do you understand now? Both the lawyers laughed out loud. I should have called it sensible and moral on your part not to have squandered it all, chuckled Nikolai Parfenovitch. For after all, what does it amount to? Why, that I stole it. That's what it amounts to. Oh, God, you horrify me by not understanding. Every day that I had that 1,500 sewn up round my neck, every day and every hour I said to myself, you're a thief. You're a thief. Yes, that's why I've been so savage all this month. That's why I fought in the tavern. That's why I attacked my father. It was because I felt I was a thief. I couldn't make up my mind. I didn't dare even to tell Alyosha, my brother, about that 1,500. I felt I was such a scoundrel and such a pickpocket. But do you know, while I carried it inside to myself at that same time every hour, no, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, you may not yet be a thief. Why? Because I might go next day and pay back that 1,500 to Katya. And only yesterday I made up my mind to tear my amulet off my neck on my way from Fenyas to Perhotin. I hadn't been able till that morning to bring myself to it, and it was only when I tore it off that I became a downright thief and a dishonest man for the rest of my life. Why? Because with that I destroyed too my dream of going to Katya and saying, I'm a scoundrel, but not a thief. Do you understand now? Do you understand? What was it made you decide to do it yesterday? Nikolai Parfenovitch interrupted. Why, it's absurd to ask, because I had condemned myself to die at 5 o'clock this morning, here at dawn. I thought it made no difference whether I died a thief or a man of honor. But I see it's not so. It turns out it does make a difference. Believe me, gentlemen, what has tortured me most during this night has not been the thought that I'd killed the old servant, and that I was in danger of Siberia just when my love was being rewarded, and heaven was open to me again. Oh, that did torture me, but not in the same way. Not so much as the damned consciousness that I had torn that damned money off my breast at last, and spent it, and had become a downright thief. Oh, gentlemen, I tell you again, with a bleeding heart, I have learnt a great deal this night. I have learnt that it's not only impossible to live a scoundrel, but impossible to die a scoundrel. No, gentlemen, one must die honest. Mitya was pale. His face had a haggard and exhausted look, in spite of his being intensely excited. I'm beginning to understand you, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, the prosecutor said slowly, in a soft and almost compassionate tone. But all this, if you'll excuse my saying so, is a matter of nerves, in my opinion. Your overwrought nerves, that's what it is. And why, for instance, should you not have saved yourself such misery for almost a month, by going and returning that 1,500 to the lady who had entrusted it to you? Why could you not have explained things to her, and in view of your position, which you describe as being so awful, why could you not have had recourse to the plan which would so naturally have occurred to one's mind? That is, after honorably confessing your errors to her, why could you not have asked her to lend you the sum needed for your expenses, which, with her generous heart, she would certainly not have refused you in your distress, especially if it had been with some guarantee, or even on the security you offered to the merchant Samsonov and to Madame Holkolov? I suppose you still regard that security as of value. Mitya suddenly crimsoned. Surely you don't think me such an out-and-out scoundrel as that. You can't be speaking in earnest, he said with indignation, looking the prosecutor straight in the face and seeming unable to believe his ears. I assure you I'm in earnest. Why do you imagine I'm not serious? It was the prosecutor's turn to be surprised. Oh, how base that would have been, gentlemen. Do you know, you are torturing me. Let me tell you everything, so be it. I'll confess all my infernal wickedness, but to put you to shame, and you'll be surprised yourself at the depth of ignominy to which a medley of human passions can sink. You must know that I already had that plan myself. That plan you spoke of just now, prosecutor. Yes, gentlemen, I too have had that thought in my mind all this current month, so that I was on the point of deciding to go to my Katya. Mean enough for that. But to go to her, to tell her of my treachery, and for that very treachery to carry it out, for the expenses of that treachery, to beg for money from her, Katya, to beg, do you hear, to beg, and to go straight from her to run away with the other, the rival, who hated and insulted her. To think of it! You must be mad, prosecutor. Mad I am not, but I did speak in haste without thinking of that feminine jealousy, if there could be jealousy in this case, as you assert. Yes, perhaps there is something of the kind, said the prosecutor, smiling. But that would have been so infamous. Mitya brought his fist down on the table fiercely. That would have been filthy beyond everything. Yes, do you know that she might have given me that money? Yes, and she would have given it too. She'd have given it to satisfy her vengeance, to show her contempt for me. For hers is an infernal nature too, and she's a woman of great wrath. I'd have taken the money too. Oh, I should have taken it. I should have taken it, and then, for the rest of my life... Oh, God, forgive me, gentlemen, I'm making such an outcry, because I've had that thought in my mind so lately. Only the day before yesterday, that night, when I was having all that bother with Lyagavy, and afterwards yesterday, all day yesterday, I remember till that happened. Till what happened? Put in Nikolai Parfenovitch inquisitively, but Mitya did not hear it. I've made you an awful confession, Mitya said gloomily in conclusion. You must appreciate it, and what's more, you must respect it. For if not, that leaves your souls untouched. Then you've simply no respect for me, gentlemen. Oh, I shall shoot myself. Yes, I see. I see already that you don't believe me. What, you want to write that down too? He cried in dismay. Yes, what you said just now, said Nikolai Parfenovitch, looking at him surprised. That is, that up to that last hour you were still contemplating going to Katerina Ivanovna to beg that sum from her. I assure you that's a very important piece of evidence for us, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. I mean, for the whole case. And particularly for you. Particularly important for you. Have mercy, gentlemen, Mitya flung up his hands. Don't write that anyway. Have some shame. Here, I've torn my heart asunder before you. And you seize the opportunity and are fingering the wounds in both halves? Oh, my God! In despair, he hid his face in his hands. Don't worry yourself so, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, observed the prosecutor. Everything that is written down will be read over to you afterwards, and what you don't agree with, too, will alter as you like. But now, I'll ask you one little question for the second time. Has no one, absolutely no one, heard from you of that money you sewed up? That, I must tell you, is almost impossible to believe. No one. No one. I told you so before, or you've not understood anything. Let me alone. Very well, this matter is bound to be explained, and there's plenty of time for it. But meantime, consider, we have perhaps a dozen witnesses that you, yourself, spread it abroad, and even shouted almost everywhere about the 3,000 you'd spent here. 3,000, not 1,500. And now, too, when you've got a hold of the money you had yesterday, you gave many people to understand that you had bought 3,000 with you. You've got not dozens, but hundreds of witnesses. 200 witnesses. 200 have heard it. Thousands have heard it, cried Mitya. Well, you see, all bear witness to it, and the word all means something. It means nothing. I talked rot, and everyone began repeating it. But what need had you to talk rot, as you called it? The devil knows. From bravado, perhaps, at having wasted so much money? To try and forget that money I had sewn up, perhaps? Yes, that was why... Damn it! How often will you ask me that question? Well, I told a fib, and that was the end of it. Once I'd said it, I didn't care to correct it. What does a man tell lies for sometimes? That's very difficult to decide, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, what makes a man tell lies, observed the prosecutor impressively. Tell me, though, was that amulet, as you called it, on your neck, a big thing? No, not big. How big, for instance? If you fold a 100-ruble note in half, that would be the size. You'd better show us the remains of it. You must have them somewhere. Damnation, what nonsense! I don't know where they are. But excuse me, where and when did you take it off your neck? According to your own evidence, you didn't go home. When I was going from Fenya's to Perhotin's on the way, I tore it off my neck and took out the money. In the dark? What should I want a light for? I did it with my fingers in 1 minute. Without scissors in the street? In the marketplace, I think it was. Why scissors? It was an old rag. It was torn in a minute. Where did you put it afterwards? I dropped it there. Where was it exactly? In the marketplace. In the marketplace! The devil knows whereabouts. What do you want to know for? That's extremely important, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. It would be material evidence in your favor. How is it you don't understand that? Who helped you to sew it up a month ago? No one helped me. I did it myself. Can you sew? A soldier has to know to sew. No knowledge was needed to do that. Where did you get the materials, that is, the rag in which you sewed the money? Are you laughing at me? No, not at all. Are we in no mood for laughing, Dmitri Fyodorovitch? I don't know where I got the rag from. Somewhere, I suppose. I should have thought you couldn't have forgotten it. Upon my word, I don't remember. I might have torn a bit off my linen. That's very interesting. We might find in your lodgings tomorrow the shirt or whatever it is from which you tore your rag. What sort of rag was it? Cloth or linen? Goodness only knows what it was. Wait a bit. I believe I didn't tear it off anything. It was a bit of calico. I believe I sewed it up in a cap of my landlady's. In your landlady's cap? Yes, I took it from her. How did you get it? You see, I remember once taking a cap for a rag, perhaps to wipe my pen on it. I took it without asking, because it was a worthless rag. I tore it up, and I took the notes and sewed them up in it. I believe it was in that very rag I sewed it. An old piece of calico, washed 1,000 times. And you remember that for certain now? I don't know whether for certain. I think it was in the cap, but hang it, what does that matter? In that case, your landlady will remember that the thing was lost. No, she won't. She didn't miss it. It was an old rag, I tell you, an old rag not worth a farthing. And where did you get the needle and thread? I'll stop now. I won't say any more. Enough of it, said Mitya, losing his temper at last. It's strange that you should have so completely forgotten where you threw the pieces in the marketplace. Give orders for the marketplace to be swept tomorrow, and perhaps you'll find it, said Mitya, sneering. Enough, gentlemen, enough, he decided in an exhausted voice. I see you don't believe me. Not for a moment. It's my fault, not yours. I ought not to have been so ready. Why did I degrade myself by confessing my secret to you? It's a joke to you. I see that from your eyes. You led me on to it, prosecutor. Sing a hymn of triumph if you can. Damn you, you torturers. He bent his head and hid his face in his hands. The lawyers were silent. A minute later he raised his head and looked at them almost vacantly. His face expressed now complete, hopeless despair, and he sat mute, passive, as though hardly conscious of what was happening. In the meantime, they had to finish what they were about. They had immediately to begin examining the witnesses. It was by now 8 o'clock in the morning. The lights had been extinguished long ago. Mikhail Makarovitch and Kalganov, who had been continually in and out of the room all the while the interrogation had been going on, had now both gone out again. The lawyers, too, looked very tired. It was a wretched morning. The whole sky was overcast, and the rain streamed down in bucketfuls. Mitya gazed blankly out of the window. May I look out of the window? He asked Nikolai Parfenovitch suddenly. Oh, as much as you like, the latter replied. Mitya got up and went to the window. The rain lashed against the little greenish panes of the window. He could see the muddy road just below the window and further away, in the rainy mist, a row of poor, black, dismal huts, looking even blacker and poorer in the rain. Mitya thought of Phoebus, the golden-haired, and how he had meant to shoot himself at his first ray. Perhaps it would be even better on a morning like this, he thought with a smile, and suddenly, flinging his hands downwards, he turned to his torturers. Gentlemen, he cried, I see that I am lost. But she, tell me about her, I beseech you. Surely she needs not be ruined with me. She's innocent, you know. She was out of her mind when she cried last night. It's all my fault. She's done nothing. I've been grieving over her all night as I sat with you. Won't you tell me what you're going to do with her? You can set your mind quite at rest on that score, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, the prosecutor answered at once with evident alacrity. We have, so far, no grounds for interfering with the lady in whom you are so interested. I trust that it may be the same in the latter development of the case. On the contrary, we'll do everything that lies in our power in that matter. Set your mind completely at rest. Gentlemen, I thank you. I knew that you were honest, straightforward people in spite of everything. You've taken a load off my heart. Well, what are we to do now? I'm ready. Well, we ought to make haste. We must pass to examining the witnesses without delay. That must be done in your presence, and therefore, shouldn't we have some tea first? Interposed Nikolai Parfenovitch. I think we've deserved it. They decided that if tea were ready downstairs, Mikhail Makarovitch had no doubt gone down to get some. They would have a glass, and then go on, putting off their proper breakfast until a more favorable opportunity. Tea really was ready now, and was soon brought up. Mitya at first refused the glass that Nikolai Parfenovitch politely offered him, but afterwards he asked for it himself and drank it greedily. He looked surprisingly exhausted. It might have been supposed from his Herculean strength that one night of carousing, even accompanied by the most violent emotions, could have had little effect on him. But he felt that he could hardly hold his head up, and from time to time all the objects about him seemed heaving and dancing before his eyes. A little more, and I shall begin raving, he said to himself. End of Chapter 7 of Book 9. Recording by Christopher Marseille.
Book 9, Chapter 8 of The Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ashley Candland. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 9, Chapter 8. The Evidences of the Witnesses. The Babe. The examination of the witnesses began, but we will not continue our story in such detail as before, and so we will not dwell on how Nikolai Parfenovitch impressed on every witness called that he must give his evidence in accordance with truth and conscience, and that he would afterwards have to repeat his evidence on oath, how every witness was called upon to sign the protocol of his evidence, and so on. We will only note that the point principally insisted upon in the examination was the question of the 3,000 roubles. That is, was the sum spent here at Mokroe by Mitya on the first occasion a month before 3,000 or 1,500? And again, had he spent 3,000 or 1,500 yesterday? Alas, all the evidence given by everyone turned out to be against Mitya. There was not one in his favor, and some witnesses introduced new, almost crushing facts in contradiction of his, Mitya's, story. The first witness examined was Trifon Borissovitch. He was not in the least abashed as he stood before the lawyers. He had, on the contrary, an air of stern and severe indignation with the accused, which gave him an appearance of truthfulness and personal dignity. He spoke little and with reserve, waited to be questioned, answered precisely and deliberately. Firmly and unhesitatingly he bore witness that the sum spent a month before could not have been less than 3,000, that all the peasants about here would testify that they had heard the sum of 3,000 mentioned by Dmitri Fyodorovitch himself. What a lot of money he flung away on the gypsy girls alone! He wasted 1,000, I dare say, on them alone. I don't believe I gave them 500, was Mitya's gloomy comment on this. It's a pity I didn't count the money at the time, but I was drunk. Mitya was sitting sideways with his back to the curtains. He listened gloomily, with a melancholy and exhausted air, as though he would say, "Oh, say what you like. It makes no difference now." "More than 1,000 went on them, Dmitri Fyodorovitch," retorted Trifon Borissovitch firmly. "You flung it about at random, and they picked it up. They were a rascally, thievish lot, horse-stealers. They've been driven away from here, or maybe they'd bear witness themselves how much they got from you. I saw the sum in your hands myself. Count it I didn't. You didn't let me, that's true enough. But by the look of it, I should say it was far more than 1,500. 1,500 indeed. We've seen money too. We can judge of amounts. As for the sum spent yesterday, he asserted that Dmitri Fyodorovitch had told him, as soon as he arrived, that he had brought 3,000 with him. "Come now, is that so, Trifon Borissovitch?" replied Mitya. "Surely I didn't declare so positively that I'd brought 3,000. "You did say so, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. You said it before Andrei. Andrei himself is still here. Send for him. And in the hall, when you were treating the chorus, you shouted straight out that you would leave your 6,000 here. That is, with what you spent before, we must understand. Stepan and Semyon heard it, and Pyotr Fomitch Kalganov, too, was standing beside you at the time. Maybe he'd remember it." The evidence as to the 6,000 made an extraordinary impression on the two lawyers. They were delighted with this new mode of reckoning. 3 and 3 made 6. 3,000 then, and 3 now, made 6. That was clear. They questioned all the peasants suggested by Trifon Borissovitch, Stepan and Semyon, the driver Andrei, and Kalganov. The peasants and the driver unhesitatingly confirmed Trifon Borissovitch's evidence. They noted down, with particular care, Andrei's account of the conversation he had had with Mitya on the road. "Where," says he, "am I, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, going? to heaven or to hell? And shall I be forgiven in the next world or not? The psychological Ippolit Kirillovitch heard this with a subtle smile, and ended by recommending that these remarks as to where Dmitri Fyodorovitch would go should be included in the case. Kalganov, when called, came in reluctantly, frowning and ill-humored, and he spoke to the lawyers as though he had never met them before in his life, though they were acquaintances whom he had been meeting every day for a long time past. He began by saying that he knew nothing about it and didn't want to. But it appeared that he had heard of the 6,000, and he admitted that he had been standing close by at the moment. As far as he could see, he didn't know how much money Mitya had in his hands. He affirmed that the Poles had cheated at cards. In reply to reiterated questions, he stated that after the Poles had been turned out, Mitya's position with Agrafena Alexandrovna had certainly improved, and that she had said that she loved him. He spoke of Agrafena Alexandrovna with reserve and respect, as though she had been a lady of the best society, and did not once allow himself to call her Grushenka. In spite of the young man's obvious repugnance at giving evidence, Ippolit Kirillovitch examined him at great length, and only from him learnt all the details of what made up Mitya's romance, so to say, on that night. Mitya did not once pull Kalganov up. At last they let the young man go, and he left the room with unconcealed indignation. The Poles, too, were examined. Though they had gone to bed in their room, they had not slept all night, and on the arrival of the police officers they hastily dressed and got ready, realizing that they would certainly be sent for. They gave their evidence with dignity, though not without some uneasiness. The little Pole turned out to be a retired official of the 12th class, who had served in Siberia as a veterinary surgeon. His name was Musyalovitch. Pan Vrubelsky turned out to be an uncertified dentist. Although Nikolai Parfenovitch asked them questions on entering the room, they both addressed their answers to Mihail Makarovitch, who was standing on one side, taking him in their ignorance for the most important person and in command, and addressed him at every word as Pan Colonel. Only after several reproofs from Mihail Makarovitch himself, they grasped that they had to address their answers to Nikolai Parfenovitch only. It turned out that they could speak Russian quite correctly, except for their accent in some words. Of his relations with Grushenka, past and present, Pan Musyalovitch spoke proudly and warmly, so that Mitya was roused at once and declared that he would not allow the scoundrel to speak like that in his presence. Pan Musyalovitch at once called attention to the word scoundrel, and begged that it should be put down in the protocol. Mitya fumed with rage. "He's a scoundrel, a scoundrel! You can put that down, and put down, too, that in spite of the protocol I still declare that he's a scoundrel," he cried. Though Nikolai Parfenovitch did insert this in the protocol, he showed the most praiseworthy tact and management. After sternly reprimanding Mitya, he cut short all further inquiry into the romantic aspect of the case, and hastened to pass to what was essential. One piece of evidence given by the Poles roused special interest in the lawyers. That was how, in that very room, Mitya had tried to buy off Pan Musyalovitch, and had offered him 3,000 roubles to resign his claims, 700 roubles down, and the remaining 2,300 to be paid next day in the town. He had sworn at the time that he had not the whole sum with him at Mokroe, but that his money was in the town. Mitya observed hotly that he had not said that he would be sure to pay him the remainder next day in the town. But Pan Vrublevsky confirmed the statement, and Mitya, after thinking for a moment, admitted, frowning, that it must have been as the Pole stated, that he had been excited at the time, and might indeed have said so. The prosecutor positively pounced on this piece of evidence. It seemed to establish for the prosecution, and they did in fact base this deduction on it, that half or a part of the 3,000 that had come into Mitya's hands might really have been left somewhere hidden in the town, or even perhaps somewhere here in Mokroe. This would explain the circumstance so baffling for the prosecution that only 800 roubles were to be found in Mitya's hands. This circumstance had been the one piece of evidence which, insignificant as it was, had hitherto told to some extent in Mitya's favor. Now this one piece of evidence in his favor had broken down. In answer to the prosecutor's inquiry where he would have got the remaining 2,300 roubles, since he himself had denied having more than 1,500, Mitya confidently replied that he had meant to offer the little chap, not money, but a formal deed of conveyance of his rights to the village of Tchermashnya, those rights which he had already offered to Samsonov and Madame Holikov. The prosecutor positively smiled at the innocence of this subterfuge. "And do you imagine he would have accepted such a deed as a substitute for 2,300 roubles in cash?" "He certainly would have accepted it," Mitya declared warmly. "Why, look here, he might have grabbed not 2,000, but 4 or 6 for it. He would have put his lawyers, Poles, and Jews on to the job, and might have got not 3,000, but the whole property out of the old man." The evidence of Pan Musyalevich was, of course, entered into the protocol in the fullest detail. Then they let the Poles go. The incident of the cheating at cards was hardly touched upon. Nikolai Parfenovitch was too well pleased with them as it was, and did not want to worry them with trifles. Moreover, it was nothing but a foolish drunken quarrel over cards. There had been drinking and disorder enough that night, so the 200 roubles remained in the pockets of the Poles. Then old Maximov was summoned. He came in timidly, approached with little steps, looking very dishevelled and depressed. He had all this time taken refuge below with Grushenka, sitting dumbly beside her, and now and then he'd begin blubbering over her and wiping his eyes with a blue check handkerchief, as Mihail Makarovitch described afterwards, so that she herself began trying to pacify and comfort him. The old man at once confessed that he had done wrong, that he had borrowed 10 roubles in my poverty from Dmitri Fyodorovitch, and that he was ready to pay it back. To Nikolai Parfenovitch's direct question, had he noticed how much money Dmitri Fyodorovitch held in his hand, as he must have been able to see the sum better than anyone when he took the note from him, Maximov, in the most positive manner, declared that there was 20,000. "Have you ever seen so much as 20,000 before, then?" inquired Nikolai Parfenovitch with a smile. "To be sure I have. Not 20, but 7, when my wife mortgaged my little property. She'd only let me look at it from a distance, boasting of it to me. It was a very thick bundle, all rainbow-coloured notes, and Dmitri Fyodorovitch's were all rainbow-coloured. He was not kept long. At last it was Grushenka's turn. Nikolai Parfenovitch was obviously apprehensive of the effect her appearance might have on Mitya, and he muttered a few words of admonition to him. But Mitya bowed his head in silence, giving him to understand that he would not make a scene. Mihail Makarovitch himself led Grushenka in. She entered with a stern and gloomy face that looked almost composed, and sat down quietly on the chair offered her by Nikolai Parfenovitch. She was very pale, she seemed to be cold, and wrapped herself closely in her magnificent black shawl. She was suffering from a slight feverish chill, the first symptom of the long illness which followed that night. Her grave air, her direct, earnest look, and quiet manner made a very favourable impression on everyone. Nikolai Parfenovitch was even a little bit fascinated. He admitted himself, when talking about it afterwards, that only then had he seen how handsome the woman was, for, though he had seen her several times, he had always looked upon her as something of a provincial hetaira. "She has the manners of the best society," he said enthusiastically, gossiping about her in a circle of ladies, but this was received with positive indignation by the ladies, who immediately called him a naughty man, to his great satisfaction. As she entered the room, Grushenka only glanced for an instant at Mitya, who looked at her uneasily. But her face reassured him at once. After the first inevitable inquiries and warnings, Nikolai Parfenovitch asked her, hesitating a little, but preserving the most courteous manner, on what terms she was with the retired lieutenant, Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov. To this Grushenka firmly and quietly replied, "He was an acquaintance. He came to see me as an acquaintance during the last month." To further inquisitive questions she answered plainly and with complete frankness that though, at times, she had thought him attractive, she had not loved him, but had won his heart as well as his old father's in my nasty spite, that she had seen that Mitya was very jealous of Fyodor Pavlovitch and everyone else, but that had only amused her. She had never meant to go to Fyodor Pavlovitch, she had simply been laughing at him. "I had no thoughts for either of them all this last month. I was expecting another man who had wronged me. But I think," she said in conclusion, "that there's no need for you to inquire about that, nor for me to answer you, for that's my own affair." Nikolai Parfenovitch immediately acted upon this hint. He again dismissed the romantic aspect of the case, and passed to the serious one, that is, to the question of most importance, concerning the 3,000 roubles. Grushenka confirmed the statement that 3,000 roubles had certainly been spent on the first carousal at Mokroe, and though she had not counted the money herself, she had heard that it was 3,000 from Dmitri Fyodorovitch's own lips. "Did he tell you that alone, or before someone else, or did you only hear him speak of it to others in your presence?" the prosecutor inquired immediately. To which Grushenka replied that she had heard him say so before other people, and had heard him say so when they were alone. "Did he say it to you alone once or several times?" inquired the prosecutor, and learned that he had told Grushenka so several times. Ippolit Kirillovitch was very well satisfied with this piece of evidence. Further examination elicited that Grushenka knew, too, where that money had come from, and that Dmitri Fyodorovitch had got it from Katerina Ivanovna. "And did you never once hear that the money spent a month ago was not 3,000, but less, and that Dmitri Fyodorovitch had saved half that sum for his own use?" "No, I never heard that," answered Grushenka. It was explained further that Mitya had, on the contrary, often told her that he hadn't a farthing. "He was always expecting to get some from his father," said Grushenka in conclusion. "Did he never say before you, casually, or in a moment of irritation," Nikolai Parfenovitch put in suddenly, "that he intended to make an attempt on his father's life?" "Ach, he did say so," sighed Grushenka. "Once or several times?" "He mentioned it several times, always in anger." "And did you believe he would do it?" "No, I never believed it," she answered firmly. "I had faith in his noble heart." "Gentlemen, allow me," cried Mitya suddenly, "allow me to say one word to Agrafena Alexandrovna in your presence." "You can speak," Nikolai Parfenovitch assented. "Agrafena Alexandrovna," Mitya got up from his chair, "have faith in God and in me. I am not guilty of my father's murder." Having uttered these words, Mitya sat down again on his chair. Grushenka stood up and crossed herself devoutly before the icon. "Thanks be to Thee, O Lord," she said, in a voice thrilled with emotion, and still standing she turned to Nikolai Parfenovitch and added, "As he has spoken now, believe it. I know him. He'll say anything as a joke or from obstinacy, but he'll never deceive you against his conscience. He's telling the whole truth, you may believe it." "Thanks, Agrafena Alexandrovna. You've given me fresh courage," Mitya responded in a quivering voice. As to the money spent the previous day, she declared that she did not know what sum it was, but had heard him tell several people that he had 3,000 with him. And to the question where he got the money, she said that he had told her that he had stolen it from Katerina Ivanovna, and that she had replied to that he hadn't stolen it, and that he must pay the money back next day. On the prosecutor's asking her emphatically whether the money he said he had stolen from Katerina Ivanovna was what he had spent yesterday, or what he had squandered here a month ago, she declared that he meant the money spent a month ago, and that that was how she understood him. Grushenka was at last released, and Nikolai Parfenovitch informed her impulsively that she might at once return to the town, and that if he could be of any assistance to her, with horses for example, or if she would care for an escort, he would be... "I thank you sincerely," said Grushenka, bowing to him. "I'm going with this old gentleman. I am driving him back to town with me, and meanwhile, if you'll allow me, I'll wait below to hear what you decide about Dmitri Fyodorovitch." She went out. Mitya was calm, and even looked more cheerful, but only for a moment. He felt more and more oppressed by a strange physical weakness. His eyes were closing with fatigue. The examination of the witnesses was, at last, over. They proceeded to a revision of the protocol. Mitya got up, moved from his chair to the corner by the curtain, lay down on a large chest covered with a rug, and instantly fell asleep. He had a strange dream, utterly out of keeping with the place and the time. He was driving somewhere in the steppes, where he had been stationed long ago, and a peasant was driving him in a cart with a pair of horses, through snow and sleet. He was cold. It was early in November, and the snow was falling in big wet flakes, melting as soon as it touched the earth. And the peasant drove him smartly. He had a fair, long beard. He was not an old man, somewhere about 50, and he had on a grey peasant smock. Not far off was a village. He could see the black huts, and half the huts were burnt down. There were only the charred beams sticking up. And as they drove in, There were peasant women drawn up along the road, a lot of women, a whole row, all thin and wan, with their faces a sort of brownish color, especially one at the edge, a tall, bony woman who looked 40 but might have been only 20, with a long, thin face, and in her arms was a little baby crying, and her breasts seemed so dried up that there was not a drop of milk in them. And the child cried and held out its little bare arms with its little fists blue from cold. "Why are they crying? Why are they crying?" Mitya asked as they dashed gaily by. "It's the babe," answered the driver, "the babe weeping." And Mitya was struck by his saying in his peasant way, "the babe," and he liked the peasants calling it a babe. There seemed more pity in it. "But why is it weeping?" Mitya persisted stupidly. "Why are its little arms bare? Why don't they wrap it up?" "The babe's cold. Its little clothes are frozen and don't warm it." "But why is it? Why?" Foolish Mitya still persisted. "Why, they're poor people, burnt out. They've no bread. They're begging because they've been burnt out." "No, no!" Mitya, as it were, still did not understand. "Tell me why it is those poor mothers stand there. Why are people poor? Why is the babe poor? Why is the steppe barren? Why don't they hug each other and kiss? Why don't they sing songs of joy? Why are they so dark from black misery? Why don't they feed the babe?" And he felt that though his questions were unreasonable and senseless, yet he wanted to ask just that, and he had to ask it just in that way. And he felt that a passion of pity, such as he had never known before, was rising in his heart, that he wanted to cry, that he wanted to do something for them all, so that the babe should weep no more, so that the dark-faced, dried-up mother should not weep, that no one should shed tears again from that moment, and he wanted to do it at once, regardless of all obstacles, with all the recklessness of the Karamazovs. "And I'm coming with you. I won't leave you now for the rest of my life. I'm coming with you," he heard close beside him Grushenka's tender voice, thrilling with emotion. And his heart glowed, and he struggled forward towards the light, and he longed to live, to go on and on towards the new, beckoning light, and to hasten now, at once. "What? Where?" he exclaimed, opening his eyes, and sitting up on the chest, as though he had revived from a swoon, smiling brightly. Nikolai Parfenovitch was standing over him, suggesting that he should hear the protocol read aloud and sign it. Mitya guessed that he had been asleep for an hour or more, but he did not hear Nikolai Parfenovitch. He was suddenly struck by the fact that there was a pillow under his head, which hadn't been there when he had leant back, exhausted, on the chest. "Who put that pillow under my head? Who was so kind?" he cried, with a sort of ecstatic gratitude, and tears in his voice, as though some great kindness had been shown him. He had never found out who this kind man was. Perhaps one of the peasant witnesses, or Nikolai Parfenovitch's little secretary, had compassionately thought to put a pillow under his head. But his whole soul was quivering with tears. He went to the table and said that he would sign whatever they liked. "I've had a good dream, gentlemen," he said in a strange voice, with a new light, as of joy, in his face. End of Chapter 8 of Book 9. Recording by Ashley Cantland.
Book 9, Chapter 9 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Glenn Simonson. When the protocol had been signed, Nikolai Parfenovitch turned solemnly to the prisoner and read him the committal, setting forth that in such a year, on such a day, in such a place, the investigating lawyer of such and such a district court, having examined so-and-so, to wit, Mitya, accused of this and of that, all the charges were carefully written out, and having considered that the accused, not pleading guilty to the charges made against him, had brought forward nothing in his defense, while the witnesses, so-and-so and so-and-so, and the circumstances such and such, testify against him, acting in accordance with such and such articles of the statute book, and so on, has ruled that, in order to preclude so-and-so, Mitya, from all means of evading pursuit and judgment, he be detained in such and such a prison, which he hereby notifies to the accused, and communicates a copy of this same committal to the deputy prosecutor, and so on, and so on. In brief, Mitya was informed that he was, from that moment, a prisoner, and that he would be driven at once to the town, and there shut up in a very unpleasant place. Mitya listened attentively, and only shrugged his shoulders. "Well, gentlemen, I don't blame you. I'm ready. I understand that there's nothing else for you to do." Nikolai Parfenovitch informed him gently that he would be escorted at once by the rural police officer, Mavriky Mavrikyevich, who happened to be on the spot. "Stay!" Mitya interrupted suddenly, and impelled by an uncontrollable feeling, he pronounced, addressing all in the room, "Gentlemen, we're all cruel, we're all monsters, we all make men weep, and mothers, and babes at the breast. But of all, let it be settled here, now, of all I am the lowest reptile. I've sworn to amend, and every day I've done the same filthy things. I understand now that such men as I need a blow of destiny to catch them as with a noose, and bind them by force from without. Never, never should I have risen of myself. But the thunderbolt has fallen. I accept the torture of accusation and my public shame. I want to suffer, and by suffering I shall be purified. Perhaps I shall be purified, gentlemen? But listen, for the last time, I am not guilty of my father's blood. I accept my punishment, not because I killed him, but because I meant to kill him, and perhaps I really might have killed him. Still, I mean to fight it out with you. I warn you of that. I'll fight it out with you to the end, and then God will decide. Goodbye, gentlemen. Don't be vexed with me for having shouted at you during the examination. Oh, I was still such a fool then. In another minute I shall be a prisoner, but for now, for the last time, as a free man, Dmitri Karamazov offers you his hand. Saying goodbye to you, I say it to all men." His voice quivered, and he stretched out his hand, but Nikolai Parfenovitch, who happened to stand nearest to him, with a sudden, almost nervous movement, hid his hands behind his back. Mitya instantly noticed this, and started. He let his outstretched hand fall at once. "The preliminary inquiry is not yet over," Nikolai Parfenovitch faltered, somewhat embarrassed. "We will continue it in the town, and I, for my part, of course, am ready to wish you all success in your defense. As a matter of fact, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, I have always been disposed to regard you as, so to speak, more unfortunate than guilty. All of us here, if I may make bold to speak for all, we are all ready to recognize that you are, at bottom, a young man of honor, but alas, one who has been carried away by certain passions to a somewhat excessive degree." Nikolai Parfenovitch's little figure was positively majestic by the time he had finished speaking. It struck Mitya that in another minute this boy would take his arm, lead him to another corner, and renew their conversation about girls. But many quite irrelevant and inappropriate thoughts sometimes occur even to a prisoner when he is being led out to execution. "Gentlemen, you are good, you are humane. May I see her to say goodbye for the last time?" asked Mitya. "Certainly, but considering... In fact, now it's impossible, except in the presence of... Oh well, if it must be so, it must." Grushenka was brought in, but the farewell was brief, in a few words, and did not at all satisfy Nikolai Parfenovitch. Grushenka made a deep bow to Mitya. "I have told you I am yours, and I will be yours. I will follow you forever, wherever they may send you. Farewell. You are guiltless, though you've been your own undoing." Her lips quivered. Tears flowed from her eyes. "Forgive me, Grusha, for my love, for ruining you too with my love." Mitya would have said something more, but he broke off and went out. He was at once surrounded by men who kept a constant watch on him. At the bottom of the steps, to which he had been driven up with such a dash the day before with Andrew's 3 horses, 2 carts stood in readiness. Mavriky Mavrikyevich, a sturdy, thick-set man with a wrinkled face, was annoyed about something, some sudden irregularity. He was shouting angrily. He asked Mitya to get into the cart with somewhat excessive surliness. "When I stood him drinks in the tavern, the man had quite a different face," thought Mitya as he got in. At the gates there was a crowd of people, peasants, women, and drivers. Trifon Borissovich came down from the steps too. All stared at Mitya. "Forgive me at parting, good people," Mitya shouted suddenly from the cart. "Forgive us too," he heard 2 or 3 voices. "Goodbye to you too, Trifon Borissovich." But Trifon Borissovich did not even turn round. He was, perhaps, too busy. He too was shouting and fussing about something. It appeared that everything was not yet ready in the second cart, in which 2 constables were to accompany Mavriky Mavrikyevich. The peasant who had been ordered to drive the second cart was pulling on his smock, stoutly maintaining that it was not his turn to go, but Akim's. But Akim was not to be seen. They ran to look for him. The peasant persisted and besought them to wait. "You see what our peasants are, Mavriky Mavrikyevich. They've no shame," exclaimed Trifon Borissovich. "Akim gave you 25 kopecks the day before yesterday. You've drunk it all, and now you cry out. I'm simply surprised at your good nature. With our low peasants, Mavriky Mavrikyevich, that's all I can say." "But what do we want a second cart for?" Mitya put in. "Let's start with the one, Mavriky Mavrikyevich." "I won't be unruly. I won't run away from you, old fellow. What do we want an escort for?" "I'll trouble you, sir, to learn how to speak to me if you've never been taught. I'm not old fellow to you, and you can keep your advice for another time." Mavriky Mavrikyevich snapped out savagely, as though glad to vent his wrath. Mitya was reduced to silence. He flushed all over. A moment later he felt suddenly very cold. The rain had ceased, but the dull sky was still overcast with clouds, and a keen wind was blowing straight in his face. "I've taken a chill," thought Mitya, twitching his shoulders. At last Mavriky Mavrikyevich too got into the cart, sat down heavily, and as though without noticing it, squeezed Mitya into the corner. It is true that he was out of humor and greatly disliked the task that had been laid upon him. "Goodbye, Trifon Borissovich," Mitya shouted again, and felt himself that he had not called out this time from good nature, but involuntarily from resentment. But Trifon Borissovich stood proudly, with both hands behind his back, and staring straight at Mitya with a stern and angry face. He made no reply. "Goodbye, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, goodbye!" He heard all at once the voice of Kalganov, who had suddenly darted out. Running up to the cart, he held out his hand to Mitya. He had no cap on. Mitya had time to seize and press his hand. "Goodbye, dear fellow! I shan't forget your generosity!" he cried warmly. But the cart moved and their hands parted. The bell began ringing, and Mitya was driven off. Kalganov ran back, sat down in a corner, bent his head, hid his face in his hands, and burst out crying. For a long while he sat like that, crying as though he were a little boy instead of a young man of 20. Oh, he believed almost without doubt in Mitya's guilt. "What are these people? What can men be after this?" he exclaimed incoherently, in bitter despondency, almost despair. At that moment he had no desire to live. "Is it worth it? Is it worth it?" exclaimed the boy in his grief. End of Book 9. End of Part 3 of The Brothers Karamazov. Recording by Glenn Simonson.